that we have started. And then we can actually start. Okay. Should I send you over my Twitch channel? Would you like to follow up with the chat, or is it okay if I just read it out loud for you, the questions?
Well, I think if we're gonna do a chat thing, I would prefer to do that after whatever
Okay.
main questions you do.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
like,
I always
if I'm reading chat while we talk, it's very distracting.
Yeah, true. I agree with that as well. Yeah.
I think it's a higher quality conversation.
True. I agree with that. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me know if everything is working fine. Hölgyek, urak, tudassátok velünk, hogyha minden jó, és akkor kezdhetünk is, jó? És akkor kezdhetünk is. Let me sit into my original position. By the way, sorry, I was looking right side, just my camera is here and my monitor is here, so that's why. Okay, they are saying, by the way, that everything is working fine, audio, video as well.
Okay.
Let me know, dear Jonathan, if we can start. Let me know if you're down to start as well.
Yeah, let me get my tea set up a little bit.
Okay.
I'll be ready.
Okay.
Just doing a couple of things. I'll make the noise of mixing the honey into the tea first. So
love that. I used to drink tea, by the way, a lot. Like, tea was my everything, but I stopped it because of my like small heart issues. So I was like,
oh, like caffeine is bad?
Yeah, exactly. So I had
well,
to
there is a
stop.
lot of tea that doesn't have caffeine.
Yeah,
well,
true.
Sort of.
Yeah. So and now I'm drinking lemonade mostly. Self-made lemonade.
I don't really like lemonade.
Oh, okay.
No, that's fine.
But I drink it without sugar, so only like lemon and water together. So yeah.
Oh,
it's like a special lemonade.
I really wouldn't like that.
I got used to it, and I can tell you it's helpful. Like, it's
All right, I think I'm ready to go.
Okay. So welcome everyone in my very new episode of my Dev Live show today. I'm joined with Jonathan, though, who is the creator of the games called Braid and The Witness. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very thankful and also very honored that you joined us for today's episode. And like I'm always saying, let's start with a little bit of introduction. So please introduce yourself for us.
Well, I am what you would today call an independent game developer. That term didn't really exist when I got into video games, which was a really long time ago. But, that sort of became around the time, even before Braid came out, that was sort of the identity that made sense. And yeah, after the two games that you mentioned, after The Witness shipped, I went into a sort of a prolonged, high effort set of simultaneous research projects. And so what I've been doing for the past bunch of years is make a new programming language, make a new game engine in that programming language, which, I mean, this wasn't all me, right? People help. With the game engine especially is where we had the most help. But new game in that game engine, and it's the biggest game we've ever made by far. It's hard to compare because it's very different from something like The Witness, but it's maybe 5 times as big as The Witness, or maybe like 7 times.
That's a very big game then, yeah.
It was intended to be a small game initially, and then it just got away from us, and
I see.
made a really big game. And so that, we don't know exactly when that's going to be done, but I'm hoping early next year. So first quarter of next year, but we don't actually know.
I see.
Like there's, right now I'm sort of talking to various, you make business deals and stuff. And
true.
What makes sense in terms of timing. So that's not a promise or anything, but it's like just to give people an idea, because I have sort of been like off in a dark cave for a long time, not releasing new games. But that's what I've been doing.
Learning phase, right? And experiencing phase, I guess we could say, and the grind phase.
Maybe. Yeah. The grind phase for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Yeah. So my very first question, by the way, would be, what was your very first experience with video games as a player, if you remember those times of your past?
Wow. I There's really just sort of two that stand out. So I would have been
Okay,
very young. I was living in California. I don't know. I was maybe I want to say 6 years old or 5 years old. I don't
I
even
see.
know.
I see.
And at back then, they actually I don't know. I mean, how things are around the world, but in the United States these days, parents are very paranoid and they don't let kids run around and do things. But back then, we would just do whatever we wanted.
Yeah, it was the
Um,
same in Hungary as well. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so, this wasn't too exciting, but I lived just on this suburban street with a bunch of houses. But if you went a couple of blocks, there was, some shops and stuff. And there was just like a corner store that sold, snacks and drinks and whatever. And they had, uh, stand up arcade cabinets there. And I knew that when I'd gone there with my parents and stuff. So one day I asked my mom, I was bored on like Saturday. So I asked my mother if I could have a quarter, which was the unit of currency that you put in
I see.
arcade cabinets back then. It was just one. Later in life, it would be like you had to put in 24 of these just to start a
True, true,
game.
true.
But back then, it was just one. And I walked around, it probably took like 10 or 15 minutes for me to go there as a little kid. And then played like one game of, it was probably Asteroids,
I
right?
see.
Um, and then I came back and like I was like, oh, can I have another quarter? Because I wanted. And I think she was thrilled to like get rid of me for that long. Um, but yeah, so the kinds of games that I remember seeing at that time were these really early arcade games. So
I
like
see.
Asteroids and Scramble maybe was that early. And like Lunar Lander was like really
Nice.
old. Um, and then so sometime within about a year of that, I don't know, people realized I was really into video games, and I got for Christmas, I got the Atari 2600 game console, except it wasn't that one. There's a store in the US called Sears that probably isn't anywhere outside the US, and they they had some deal with Atari where they made their own version. I forget exactly what it was called, but it was like an Atari 2600, but it was just in a slightly different case.
I see. I see.
But it played all the same games and all that, but they called it something else. So I got one of those for Christmas, and I played so much of that. Like that was we got a lot of playtime out of that. It was crazy. I'm shocked that I didn't like save it or something. I mean, I guess it was sort of property of the house. Maybe it broke at some point,
I
but
see.
I don't know. But that would be a cool thing to just have laying around now.
True,
But
true,
but I
true, true.
don't. I don't. So this thing, which I used to back in earlier days, this sign behind me, I would have closer up so you could kind of see what it was. But this is there's sort of these columns of very small text, and then there's some orange
Yeah, I see that.
squares next to it. And what this is the source code decompiled from the Atari 2600 game Adventure, which was my
Oh,
favorite game back
okay.
then. And like
Okay.
that's the entire source code of the whole game,
Okay.
right?
Nice.
And that's how much simpler things were back then.
True, true, true,
Uh,
true.
yeah.
And they were fun, right? So those people understand
Th-
what's the core meaning of fun, in my opinion.
they were fun for back then. I think most of the thing is most of those games today nobody would really want to play actually.
Yeah, but why?
Um,
What do you think? Why?
Well, there's a few different reasons. One of them is just the core like game feel of those games is not very good compared to today.
Okay,
But a lot of that is just because the computers were so early and they were pretty slow and
I
they
see.
couldn't do very much. And they didn't like in an Atari game. Um, you didn't have floating point numbers. You barely had like integer registers to move things around, and so like you couldn't really have an object with momentum and different speeds. You
True,
had to just
true,
like
true.
really fake it and all these things, and that makes things feel really rough. That wasn't just true for Atari, right? Like all these early games were like that, but I think arcade games had a little bit more in terms of resources to work with to try to deal with that problem. Um, I mean, certainly early vector games like Asteroids did a really good job of having momentum and stuff, but
True,
Atari
true.
was like very raster. Everything occupied these big blocks. But also, like, I mean, to be honest, game design was not very refined back then. So it was a weird thing where games were actually a lot more creative and weird. And like, if a bunch of games came out one month, they would all be really different from each other, you know? Um, and but at the same time, I mean, I don't think you would really want to go back and play most of those today. I've
Would
tried
you?
once in a
Would
while,
you? Would
and
you go back and play those games?
well, occasionally I do, and they're not that fun.
I see. I see. I see.
Yeah, like I think I actually so this was a long time ago now, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago, some other developers were doing an Atari stream on Twitch, and it prompted me to go back and play like Yar's Revenge on an emulator, which was another one of these games that I played a lot of, and it was just kind of boring,
I see. I see.
you know.
So, do you
But
think
but for
it's?
back then, it was great.
I see. Do you think like it's also the process of growing up that we like see the everything evolve around us, like the technology and the
It's
knowledge
difficult. I
and
mean,
the graphics,
I'm
every segment
yeah,
of video games?
I'm not sure I can really comment on this because it's different for me than for a normal person, right? A normal person just has what you said, right? Which is computers get better and graphics get better and all this stuff. But for me, it's different too because I basically think about video games all day, every day for my whole life. So, you know, uh, I think it's natural for simpler stuff to seem boring when you do that. And of course, I hadn't done that when I was a little kid,
I see. I
so
see.
that makes it different.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. From that point of your life, by the way, that you realized that you love playing video games, what was the first click in your mind when you also realized that you would like to make games as well? So when was the first time that you
I
developed
mean,
interest into making
it was a
games?
really weird thing because my encounter with games was just as all these consumer products,
I
right? So
see.
like the arcade uh what do you call it, stand up thing um is very like, you know, obviously some companies make those, you can see their logo on it, but those just seem very far away, right, when you're little. And then, the home console is there's a way in which it's a little bit it was like more magical than today's game consoles actually, because you just have a cartridge, you put it in the slot, you turn it on, and the game is running. And you didn't actually have much visibility into how a game works or exists at all, because it's like in this cartridge. And like today, if you're on PlayStation 5 or something, there's a store full of stuff you download, and there's updates, and you got to update the console all the time and all these things. And I don't know, you see a little bit more of this software process happening. Maybe not in a good way. It probably was a lot better to be able to
Do you
stick a
think, by the way, it's
console
a
in,
bad
but
thing that we see more now with, like you said?
um, yes,
Okay.
but it's not an easy problem, because the problem that is trying to be solved for is
Sorry.
how do you do all these really complicated games like we have now and not inhibit your console by locking it down,
I
right?
see.
And because you want to fix bugs and all these things and whatever. I do think, I mean, this is maybe getting way ahead in the discussion, but like as I've said many times, I think the modern software ecosystem is tremendously more complicated than it should be. Even the word ecosystem, I just said that because that's the word people use. I don't think it's a very good word, because like ecosystem in reality is like all these beautiful, very complex things that interoperate or whatever. And what we have is more like, if you just call the local trash dump an ecosystem and more trash just keeps getting put in it, that's what it is. um and occasionally you pull something out of the trash dump that's cool. But it's like, so if you were to take everything that we actually do, so right now we're using a client that does video over the internet, and you know, we probably use web browsers a lot, and we've got some game consoles and operating system, whatever. You take all these things. If we were to rebuild these things in a way such that they were made in the best way, like you somehow could magically optimize it all, to be the simplest. I don't even mean necessarily the fast, but just the simplest. Because pick one direction to optimize. Um, it would be way less than 1% of the amount of code that we currently have, right? It would be just tremendously simpler. It depends what you're counting, right? Um, for very conservative ways of counting, maybe it would be more like 10%, but really low. It would be way less code. It would be understood way more clearly, and you would be able to do stuff like the game consoles that we have with many fewer updates and all this stuff, right? And we just don't gather the energy as a civilization to do that. And that's a little bit of a shame. Maybe someday we will, but it doesn't look like it at this rate. But yeah, so to get back to circle back to the question though, um, I kind of got lucky. Well, I got lucky and I got unlucky, right? I got lucky because when I went into the sixth grade, which meant I was like 10 years old going on 11,
I see.
I happened to be in Southern California at a school where I guess they had gotten some computers for educational purposes. And there was a whole room of about, there were probably 25 or 30 Commodore VIC-20 home computers in there, which were very, very limited computers compared to today. They had 4 kilobytes of RAM, right? Whereas like we're in Discord right now, and like each of the little profile pics for everybody is probably way bigger than that,
True,
right?
true, true.
But the whole computer had 4K of RAM, and that was like I got into this class. I don't even remember how I signed up for the class because it was like an elective, right? Not everybody was in this class, but I guess I thought computers sounded cool. I definitely didn't go to the class with any idea of wanting to do video games,
I
but
see.
like when I saw what it was, I was like, "Oh, you type commands into this thing and then they happen and you can make more sophisticated things happen." I was super hyped. Like after whatever that first week of school, I went back and like I just remember I went back to so in the town that I was in, there was one school for very young students that went up to the fifth grade, and I had just left that school the previous, before the summer, and then I went back over, and I went to the sixth grade, and I was in this, in this class, and I was so excited about it that I actually went back to, uh, like my math teacher at the previous school, and I was like, "Whoa, they've got this room full of computers. It's kind of like math, but it's way cooler because like you type commands and things happen, right?" And I was trying to explain it to him, and I was just this really excited little kid. So that was very natural. So now the downside of the way things worked out for me is I kind of then stagnated in some way for years at that point. Like because I was in American school in the 1980s, and there was just a limit to what information you could get. So there were maybe teachers at school. There were maybe a couple of books that you could find
I see.
toward the later end of this period. You could go on like bulletin board systems and talk to other people, but most of those people were not programmers either, right? And so there was a big gap between what I ended up doing, which was programming on home computers. We had a couple of home computers from that time until, let's say the next 7 or 8 years. We got a TRS-80 color computer, which I think was released in the UK under a different name as well, but here it was sold um, by Radio Shack, which is just this like weird consumer store. Um, and so I got one of those, and that's where I got more serious because my parents had seen how into the computer at school I was.
I
And so
see.
they got a computer for the family, and then I was just like in front of it every day for 8 hours. And then later on, I got a Commodore VIC or a Commodore 64 because that was like the cooler computer that more of my friends ended up having, and it had better games and all this. Because but all these computers, so the CPUs inside them. How much should I go into this kind of detail?
You can
Should we skip
you can go
technical? Oh,
as deep as you
technical.
want.
Okay, yeah.
Like
So a lot of people probably know this, but there's this company called Motorola that made a lot of the CPUs at the time. Although what you would have called a CPU back then was very simple compared to a CPU today. And so the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 actually use the same CPU. It was the Motorola 6502.
I see.
And to go between those, the biggest thing was just between those machines was just the amount of memory. Going from 4K to 64K is a big deal. Um, and then I think there were a lot more ROM routines because so the Commodore 64 had 64K of RAM, but then they also had like a large amount of ROM just of all the subroutines that things ran, and it was like bank switched because you could only address 64K, and so you kind of had to like if you were a not that sophisticated programmer, like if you're just loaded up and you're programming in basic, you probably only had like I want to say between 16 and 22K. All this is information that people have documented. So you can get the exact numbers off Wikipedia or somewhere, but you only had like a smaller amount of memory in the default configuration. But then if you were a sophisticated programmer, you would like toggle the address space so that you had more RAM
I
available. And
see.
that was a kind of trick I didn't learn until later. But the 64 was really interesting because in addition to just the base power of the CPU, they did a much better job. Like Commodore did a much better job than anybody else in those generations about augmenting the computer with things that did really good graphics and sound. And so you had this sprite system that was like a separate piece of hardware on there because the software, if you try to draw graphics, you just can't do it fast enough in enough detail, right? And so you have a separate system where you write stuff into sprite memory and then you move the sprites around, right? Um, and you could only have 8 of those, except there were cool tricks you could learn where like as the scan line goes down the screen, you would like swap out what's in the sprite table. And so you could have more than 8 sprites, but they couldn't really cross each other vertically or whatever, unless you did stuff. So it was kind of an interesting programming environment to learn in. But the real standout on the 64 was the music, right? There was this thing, the SID chip on there. I think the VIC-20 also had the SID chip. Somebody can tell me if I'm wrong. But I think it just with 4K of RAM, it's so limited that you can't really do that. Maybe it was an earlier version of the SID chip. I don't remember. Um, I was never that much into the hardware actually. But the point being, um, all these machines were similar in capability apart from that. So the TRS-80 that I had before this was actually a Motorola 6809, which was in some small respects a more powerful chip, right? But the design of this computer you couldn't really tell. Um, I mean, it was barely more powerful. I think it had a little bit more in the way of 2-byte instructions and stuff. Like, so you know, I'm gonna betray how little I remember about all this. But basically, on all of these chips, you sort of had one main register that you used most of the time. It was the A register, and it was like 8 bits, right? And that was your main numbers. And I think I get mixed up between the two. Um, Maybe 6502 had a B register. Maybe that was on 6809, but there weren't that many. And then there was like X and Y, which you used for addressing memory, and those were 2 bytes, which is why there was a 64K limit, because that's uh, it's a 16-bit number, right? Um, but there's all kinds of details I'm not remembering. So let's not go in. I'm just giving the
Yeah, I
flavor of what it
understand
was
that. I
like.
understand that.
So
Yeah.
this was so many years ago, and I've done so many things. Um, Actually, so This was a long time ago, but one time I was just at a conference in California and I was talking to John Romero about this stuff, one of the guys on Doom originally, and he loves this. He remembered it so much better than me. He probably did a lot more of it than me, but he just loves talking about 6502 assembly and all this stuff. And it made me feel guilty that I hadn't gone back and played with it more because there is something delightful about a system that simple, you know. Um, I almost wish, there were some projects to bring these back. So there was like a Commander 128 project or something at some point, which was like a modern version with modern hardware, but that was sort of re-implementing the C64, but with like slightly more memory. But I was like, dude, just, you know, just make the instruction set that's the 64-bit obvious extension of that thing and just give me a Commodore 64 with 64 gigs of RAM, right? And like 64 million sprites and just but have it be the same thing and it'll be awesome. And like people just don't, I don't know. People don't think about things that way. I don't know why. But yeah, that was so the thing is when I was a kid, I sort of rapidly advanced through the resources that were available to me.
I see.
But then I guess I sort of got blocked for a long time and I didn't know I was blocked. I was just like sort of doing what I knew how to do. I could do fun stuff on the 64. Um, I could make sprites go around. I made a few like really stupid, not quite games but almost because again like the thought of like oh maybe I could make a game and get it into a store like wasn't really there for
I
me
see. I
somehow.
see. I see.
um but some of these were funny jokes, so I made a game called Super Deformed Pac-Man. Again, I wish I still had these. I'm certain they don't exist anymore, but the so because I would go hang out at arcades and there would be all this score inflation, not just on arcade games, but like especially pinball machines. Like your pinball would hit a thing and you'd get like 500,000 points. And I was just like, this is really stupid. So I made this joke Pac-Man game where I forget, again, this is on Wikipedia, but I forget how many characters across the C64 was. I think it was 24. That's the number that's in my head. And so it was like, okay, so your score starts at like 19 digits long and it can go up to 24 and like every dot that you eat is like an insane number of points. And I made a little Pac-Man game. It was not very interesting apart from that, but it was weird. I didn't have, as a designer, I didn't have creative ideas of what I wanted to
I
do,
see.
but I was playing other games and you would think like hey just clone one of those games, but like I guess I also didn't feel as a programmer like I quite knew how to do that either.
I see.
Because it was weird. Because so what was great about these machines is you boot them up and they're in basic and you just start typing commands and you go, right? It was way less friction, right?
True. True.
But then
True.
to
True.
go from there to assembly language, which I learned pretty rapid. I mean, I learned that back on the TRS-80 after some amount of time. Um, that was a little more difficult because you had to have an assembler that would assemble your assembly language, and so that was a little bit of a hurdle. But um, that was really cool because you're doing all this low level stuff, and every little mistake like completely crashes your computer. And by the way, it was very tedious because you reboot the computer, you load from the tape or the disk drive on the C64, which was the okay, the worst thing about the C64 was how slow the disk drive was. It was astonishing. Like you had people who had an Apple II, which had horrible graphics and even worse sound and all this stuff. But like the hard drive was insanely fast for some reason, and it was literally like 10 times faster or more than the C64 hard drive. Or sorry, the floppy drive. I keep saying hard drive because I've been in the modern world so long. It was a floppy disk drive. It was a 5.25 inch. Is that the dimensions? Floppy disk drive. Um, it was a really really slow disk drive, but it could play music. So that was weird. You would get all these people who would make demos. So the drive, if I'm remembering this correctly, had its own 6502 in it. Like that's how ridiculous this was. And so you could program the whole hard drive and people would do weird stuff where you upload a program to the hard drive that would like vibrate the drive head at different frequencies and whatever. And you're like, oh, I sure hope I'm not permanently destroying my hard drive, but this sounds fun.
Mm.
But yeah, there was just a threshold that I never got past in those days of like, how serious of a program am I working on? So I was doing
But
stuff in
why? But
assembly
why?
and doing all these display tricks, but um, I just never like getting to this whole point where you were doing all the bank switching and more serious programmer things. I never, if I had an example to learn from, I might have, but I just didn't ever have that example
I
until I
see.
went to college,
I see.
right? So once I went to college, I started learning about like actual programming. But that was when I was, 17 going on 18 years old. So for those 7 years, I just kind of puttered around playing around with home computers. And I guess that's good. It's like it's practice getting better at programming, I guess, and
I
thinking
see.
about programs. But I could have been making way better stuff than I did in hindsight. That's always true though, I guess.
Do you think that you would go back to those times and have those better examples to learn and evolve around those times where you had this block you mentioned? If you had the possibility for example.
What what do you mean exactly? Like if I know what I know today about how to program
No, no, like if you had the
or what?
chance to go back to those times of yours that you mentioned
Oh,
that you
like
had this
would I
block.
enjoy it?
No, no,
Would
no.
I
Like
enjoy learning?
you would go back to those times of your life when you mentioned you had this roadblock, then
Yeah.
when you couldn't like evolve faster and have those examples that you can learn from at a later, like you had at a later age. Would you like change
Yeah.
this course of your life, like to have those
Yeah,
examples
I
at an
would
earlier age?
try I mean, I would try harder to seek more information and
I
be
see,
more
I
serious
see,
about
I
it.
see, I see, I
But the
see.
weird thing was, so, I had a number of friends who had computers and stuff. I had three or four guys who were like sort of
Sorry.
my main friends, and they all had home computers at this point. Because it was sort of the middle class thing to have by then, if you wanted your kid to be smart. Um, and among those friends, I was the most, by far, the most like computer guy,
I
right?
see, I see, I
Like I
see.
was the guy who was hyped about it and like figured all these things out. And everybody else just sort of like had one and maybe played games on it and
I
maybe did
see,
a
I
small
see,
amount of
I see, I
programming. And
see.
so like when you're when your entire friend group is like way behind where you are in this direction, you just feel like you don't see anywhere else to go, right?
I
It's like,
see.
well, and it's not, today you have the internet and there's all this information available, and I think that's one way in which people learning today have a better situation, right? Um, we didn't have that, so the information
Yeah,
just
but it's
wasn't
not always
available
helpful, in
unless.
my opinion. Sorry
No,
for
no, no. Well,
disturbing you. Like a lot
there's
of people are
lots of
getting
bad
more
things.
lazy because of all the informations are there, but they still do not pursue those informations. In my opinion, you see all these
Absolutely.
people being or these empty souls who are not pursuing knowledge and not trying to evolve because it's out there and it's easier to get, right? But they are not passionate about it enough. And I think back then at when, for example, I was a kid, I remember like being, for example, a gamer or passionate about something really meant passion. Like
Yeah.
nowadays it's like I always say this, that people are becoming these trend people in everything. Like they do not pour their real passion and their real time and real effort into getting that knowledge that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hard. Obviously, I'm a very different age now than I was when all this was happening. So it's just very hard to compare. But yes, I mean, there's plenty of bad things about the current environment. Um, but it's really hard to say. I do think like there's more potential opportunity that to be found today than there was back then. But at the same time, yeah, there are many dangers, and you do in a weird way have to maybe be more self-motivating because
True,
there's just so much trash to take your time now.
true.
Like we used to be bored all the time. Like I used to come home from school and I would be kind of bored. I haven't been bored in many, many, many years just because I have like things to do. And maybe that's what it's like having the internet now generally, because if you're about to be bored, you could just go waste all this time, I don't know, reading something stupid and getting mad at something, right, or whatever.
Yeah, but that's the
And
point, that it's waste of a
yeah,
time, in my opinion, right? So it's
well,
like
yeah,
it's not getting
maybe
knowledge or be better at something, but a waste of a time, like you mentioned. And I
and the
agree with
amount of
that.
brain drain that happens from that is probably very serious, right? Uh, it's
Yeah, because
probably
people
very
are not
bad.
questioning this topic of their life, right? They are just
Yeah.
consumers now, most of
But I'm
them.
not sure. I'm still not sure. Even with all that damage that's happening, we might still be coming out ahead. I'm not sure.
Maybe, maybe,
We'll see.
maybe. Yeah, true,
We'll,
true,
we,
true,
after another 20 years go by, we'll see what happened.
true. Okay.
Because like the weird thing is the internet's still evolving in a weird way. So for a long time, the internet was still like a slightly smarter version of what it is now, where it was like most of the content was like people's blogs or whatever website they would put up or something. And now it's all concentrated in all these platforms, and that's part of what makes it dumber, right? So it's all like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and whatever. Um, that might just be a phase that we're passing through, right? Like, so for example, once LLMs are being used all over the place. Like I already read Twitter all the time and I start reading a thread and there's 3 or 4 replies in it that are clearly LLM generated. And I don't know why people do that. I don't know if they're trying to like engagement farm their account or whatever, but
Mostly,
there's
yeah, I
no reason
guess. I guess. Yeah.
as LLMs become faster and better and cheaper to use, there's no reason to believe that an open internet like this will be mostly things that make sense and are readable eventually, right?
True, true.
Like it could all be machine generated by this time next year. And then what does that mean? Maybe it means that smaller, more closed off sub societies become the main thing again because
Exactly. Yeah.
because maybe if you go on Twitter, all the tweets are fake, and maybe if you go on Instagram, all the photos are fake, and there's
Yeah.
like no everybody knows that, and there's no reason to look at any of it. I don't know. I'm not. That's not a prediction, but it's one possibility of where things might go.
I believe
So
it's true, because I feel like everything is going like in a circle of like going back to its past and then repeating itself. Like there's a quote, right, that history repeats itself, but it's true for every life situation, in my opinion. And I believe it's what's like, people always say that we should forget about our past, but I always say the opposite. I feel like we should learn from our past and we should go back pursuing our past, and also like always dig deeper into our past, because it helps. Like people always say, it's very interesting, because I saw one of your videos and I could relate to that, where you were talking about like how technologies are not evolving really, but they're going backwards. And it's funny because I can relate to that, and I believe that. So because I feel like nowadays a lot of people think that having a newest iPhone or having a newest and bigger TV is evolving technologies, but they are not, right? So it's not that of a
yeah,
big gap that we like went through, like I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago, when there was like no television, and then we suddenly had a television,
yeah.
or a computer.
I actually
Now it's not happening anymore. Like it's very small steps and people do not see it. People think like, hey, it's a newer version of an iPhone or a newer camera, and they say that it's evolving. No, it's not that. Like,
I try to talk to people about this all the time, right? So like in the 1990s, when and in hardware it's easier to see, but the same thing happens in software, right? So in the 1990s, when I first got into making video games, this was after college. I just started a company with a friend. We didn't know how to run a company. We did not run it very well. We did not make very good decisions, but that's part of learning, right?
true, true, true. You
And
have to make mistakes, yeah.
even down to like what game to make. We made the hardest game to make, and um, it was a good learning experience, but it was not. It was deeply unprofitable. We lost money on net doing this thing, but so we're sitting there trying to figure out how to program this video game, and it excuse me,
It's okay.
having a little bit of a thing. All right. So back then, it was we decided to make a 3D video game, but it was before you had any kind of 3D graphics accelerator. So the GPU hadn't been invented yet, right? Um, Well, like I said, some early systems like the Commodore 64, that sprite system was sort of the very earliest version of a GPU. But then, like PCs later on didn't have the equivalent of that. They had like a VGA card or whatever, but it didn't really do the same kind of stuff. Um, so when you go to write a 3D game in 1996, which is when I started, you're figuring out how to draw every pixel on the screen in a loop somehow, and it turns out to be a 3D scene. And that's a lot to learn, especially back then when it was not understood as well by the industry as it is now. But also, when you're figuring it out, your code is going to go really, really slow, right? Because you're just trying to get it working. And so it really mattered to us how fast our computer was in a way that it doesn't today, you know. Um, and so we would buy new computers, new development machines. These would be PCs running Windows. We actually started on Linux, and then I went to the game developers conference, and I was like, "Oh, everybody's there is on Windows. We probably should switch." So I made us switch to Windows. But that's how old Linux is, by the way, everybody. If you think, because every time I talk about software isn't going anywhere and isn't doing anything new, people are like, "But what about Linux? It's so awesome." And I'm like, "Dude, Linux is from 1992. It's from probably before you were born, right? And it's
True.
still the same thing that it was.
True.
It's just more bloated." But the point I'm trying to get to is just we would buy new computers every 4 or 6 months, and it would be expensive, but we would do it because they were like 30% faster 4 months later, you know? And if I can compile my program and run it 30% faster, that's extremely material in terms of how much work that I can do
True. True.
to get the game done, right? And today, I mean, I actually just upgraded this computer and it's slower than my one from 5 years ago. And because that was an AMD Threadripper, and this is like, the Intel chip that turned out to get a bad rap because it degrades itself and they
Yeah.
had to issue BIOS updates to slow it down to prevent that. So it also has these so-called efficiency cores, which we jokingly call European cores on my stream. Um,
I
and
won't
they're
take
they're
I won't
slow.
take that to my heart, okay?
It's just about the government of Europe. It's not about the citizens of Europe, right?
True,
So,
true, true.
um, it's they tried to do this thing where, hey, we have these cores that are have much less hardware behind them, so they're slower, but you have more, so you can do like parallelism on them,
Yeah.
and that's not implicitly a bad idea. So like the PlayStation 3 did some version of that, but different. The problem is Intel tried to make it magic, like you just run software and it'll just go onto whatever cores, and that's horrible because stuff is just like randomly a lot slower than it should be, and depending on which core gets randomly chosen, it's a really bad idea. I don't mind it if it was just like they live on there and they only get used for specific things when you want them. That would be much better. But also, with a phone, like I got a new iPhone. This isn't the newest one because I bought it just before that came out. But like prior to this new phone, I was using the same phone for 8 years um,
I can
because it
relate
was
to that
fine,
too.
just like you're
I
saying.
can relate
Like
to that too. Yeah, yeah. I've been using
I
the
had an
iPhone 4
iPhone
like
8.
for 10 years. I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. I was using an iPhone 8. Um, for about 8 years. The only reason I switched off it was because the battery started getting. I'd already swapped it like right before Apple was about to discontinue the iPhone 8. I went in and I swapped it for a new one, but even then the battery didn't last that long.
Yeah.
And then I tried out. I tried out one of these Samsung folding Android phones for like 6 months, and just the interface on it was horrible. So I went back to the iPhone 8. Yeah, like this is the thing is, because computers are everywhere and because they do so much, and because there's like so much software, and you go on GitHub and all these things are being released every day, but like it doesn't really represent progress.
True.
Like back in the day, if you could go in a time machine, if you didn't live it, maybe some people watching this actually lived back in that day and know what I'm talking about, but you saw progress all the time. Like, okay, so you know all the excitement that's happening, let's say for the past couple years around AI and LLMs, and like, oh, this new model does things that nobody in the world was able to do before. And check out these images, they're so cool, right? That used to be all of computers in the 90s and probably the 80s, right? Um, and then there was sort of this dead period from maybe around 2004 or something until today. It's still going, where in the general space of computers, it just stopped being exciting and interesting like that. Um, and then we didn't even have, like once in a while, some topic comes up and tries to be the hot new thing and fails or whatever. And AI has been the one of those that succeeded, like the first one in a long time. I mean, there was, of course, like, I mean, I sort of skipped over like the internet and then social media and all that. And those were these things that became the big new thing. But those were all just like, those weren't technology really, because like the internet had been around in its current incarnation since the middle of the 1980s, and then in earlier incarnations since the 1970s. So like that wasn't a technological advancement. That was just like the web browser in the 90s meant it was easier enough to use that it became a thing that could spread more into the world, right?
Sure.
But like I was not that. So I in college, I was in this student group called the Experimental Computing Facility because it was hard to get good computers back then. So you had to be even at a good school like Berkeley. So you had to be in one of these groups. And I sat next to this guy named Pei Wei, who you can look up on Wikipedia. He was the author of one of the first web browsers that kind of didn't really survive. It was a browser called Viola, and it had its own programming language built in way before JavaScript and all this stuff, right? And I sat next to him, and so I sort of saw web stuff evolve. I was at one of the very early web conferences. Um, there's some funny stories about that I will skip, but I just wasn't that excited about it because I was like, okay, this is so. There was someone else who was a friend of mine at Berkeley who was even less excited about the web than I was, and he said, well, it's just FTP for dummies, right? Which I don't know how many people these days know even what FTP is, but it was a way that you got files between computers around the internet back then. There
Yeah.
were a couple different things. There was FTP, which was for files, and then a little bit later on, there was a thing called Gopher, which was kind of like could be used for text, I guess, but it didn't have links in the modern way and whatever, right? And so in a sense, the web browser was a relatively minor advance. You couldn't call it a technological advance in the hardware or software technology sense. But what it was, so this is something I'm a lot more interested in these days. What it was really more like social technology, which really is technology. It was like technology of how do you take all this raw tech that we have and just make it more usable by people, right?
See.
And that's what made the internet blow up. But as someone who was there at the time, I didn't feel like anything special was happening, right? But in retrospect, it was like this huge thing. So I don't know. That's a big tangent. Um, I forget what we were talking about.
Yeah, because like I feel like it's true because like if you still like give the technology into hands of people, they won't like consume it that hardcore. Like they won't go as deep as they should understand it, right? So it's it's
Well,
it's
just
it's the
just to
same
give
for
you,
AI, right? Sorry for interrupting. Like it's
yeah,
the same for AI. Like a lot of people are making dumb screens and arts just for fun. Like it's okay, of course. Like they're using it like consumers, but they do not understand the AI itself, right? So they do not go behind the curtain. And I think with all of these technologies, the real problem is that people might be not the right ones to like go beyond the curtain because they are not wired like that, right? So
yeah.
not
Well,
everyone
for
will
sure.
go beyond those walls.
Yeah, for sure. Even when I look at most of the companies that are being started up in this space, right? There's all these little, because, from like 2010 to 2019, we had this big frenzy of all these startup companies. and then they kind of, there was a big lull, or COVID killed a bunch of them. And then there was sort of an internet boom around 2021, but that was more existing companies. But then, around 2022 or 2023, AI became the big sector where everyone starting a company wanted to get in there, right? Once LLMs started being really obviously successful. And the thing is, most of these companies are like obvious trash companies, right? They're like, all they are is like, we're using the API from, you know, from OpenAI, or maybe we can swap it out for Anthropic in case that seems better. And we're just pre-training it on some domain specific data, and we don't even know how pre-training really works. We're
True,
just
true,
we're
true.
just feeding them the files. And that's most of these companies, right?
Yeah,
And but maybe that's fine, because maybe that's what it looks like when you actually have a genuinely new technology, is that there's so much potential of it that it's not, like again, like the internet. So the hard part was figuring out how to get packets to go around the world in a reliable way that was fast, which was figured out in like the 1970s mostly. um which, by the way, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, like, I don't think the internet protocol is actually very good right now. I think it's really inefficient for what we do in the modern day, because it was designed for the 1970s. Like the MTU is still like 1 kilobyte, which is insane. But like, you know, um, it seems we still use it because it seems to be working fine, and it's too hard to change except in specialized situations, right? Um, the But the point being that the actual hard stuff all happened before, like, and there's all sorts of stuff you don't think about. So like, what was the materials science research required to invent fiber optic cable, which became one of the primary ways of transmitting data quickly? Like, how many people worked on that for how many years, right?
true.
um and all the steps leading up to that, and there's all these things that came together. And then at some point it's like, it still hasn't blown up, and then it's like, hey, what if we just put text on a page with like links? And that's the thing that makes it blow up. But it blows up because of all this potential energy that's been created in the past that exists, right? So I think maybe that's what the AI thing is now, is like, I feel like Chat GPT is kind of useless mostly. um, there's like some limited use cases that I find for it, but most of what people say right now about how great these things are is kind of hype. uh, and I only say kind of because it's a genuine technological advance. Like, I wasn't sure that we would have this kind of technology in my lifetime. If you had asked me even 10 years ago, I would have said, well, maybe not, right? um, but uh, at the same time, it doesn't really do what everybody's claiming it does,
True,
right?
true, true.
So there's all that. But again, maybe that just means there's this large amount of potential energy built up, and there's something. Maybe we're waiting for something as simple as, hey, what if you make a page of text with links, right?
True, true.
I
Again,
don't
the
know.
simple thing that you mentioned before, right? Finding that
Yeah,
simple solution and combining the knowledge that you had put into
yeah,
before
for
on your
sure.
journey. Yeah, yeah. A more personal question from me would be to you. I hope that you won't mind it
Yeah.
asking from you. So, how do you feel? Were your family members, parents, and close friends supportive about this decision of yours that you're stepping into this industry from that young age and you are?
Well, I wasn't really so all the computer enthusiasm that I had when I was really young, like I was describing, was not really, like, I never had a vision of being in the games industry
I
or
see, I
anything,
see, I see, I
right?
see, I see.
Um, but like that only happened like after college,
I see.
So again, to go back to a interesting point, so way before web browsers happened. So I went to college in 1989, right? It was still the tail of the 1980s, And I got sucked into this thing. So you had the computer lab, like I said, which had these workstation class computers, which were all on the internet in 1989. Um, but the internet was mostly universities and research institutions,
I
right?
see.
It wasn't civilian things at all yet. But at Berkeley, there were some students who made a Star Trek game that ran over the internet. And if anyone knows X11 at all these Linux people out there, the initial version of it worked via like X display hosting. So that was absolutely horrible. So you had everybody was flying a different spaceship and you would like X host from the server all those people and you would pop up a window on each display and you would be doing this on the internet. And like if you weren't running it locally, the frame rate was horrible and all this, right? And so X-Trek 2 uh, was the game that I got sucked into at college, and that was sort of a reimagining of this game that didn't work by X-Host. It worked over TCP, and then later they added UDP to get better performance. But it was like, hey, you ran an individual client that displayed your view of the universe, and you talked to the server over TCP, and everybody was like having all these starship battles and stuff. And like that's probably where I spent a good 1/3 of my waking hours in college. That's probably an exaggeration, but there were some months for which that was literally like I would be playing, you know, X Trek 2 in college for days and days and days. And I wasn't the only one. Like a bunch of us were playing. So we were playing, you know, internet multiplayer games in 1989, 1990, like heavily. And that's sort of what got me really into games because this was made. So I actually knew the people who had made this were just a couple years ahead of me in college, and that made it a lot more tangible. It's like, oh, if they could do this, maybe I could do some things. And so I started making game prototypes of my own. And I mean, I was also taking classes and stuff, and I was doing a bunch of other projects, like little programming language projects and stuff. But yeah, between that and like MUDs, right? The little text things where you would run around and do stuff. That was a lot of my waking hours in college. And so I was so immersed in games at that, but none of these were like commercial industry games.
I
They were
see.
games made by enthusiasts in universities. Uh, that by the time I left college, I never got a degree. By the time I left college, I just decided to do that. I was like, oh yeah, I'm so into games. Let me just do that. Um, I, as for family stuff, like my family was pretty messed up and I didn't have that much communication with anyone there.
I
And
see.
so there really wasn't any kind of question. I just did whatever I wanted about that.
I see.
And so, yeah, at some point in 1995, the begin, I think the beginning of 1995, like January, I decided to drop out of college and not go for what would have been my last semester to get a computer science degree because I was so depressed. I hated college except for
I
playing the
can
video
relate to
games.
that. I can relate to that, by the way.
Yeah. No,
I
every
know your
day I
story,
was
by the
just,
way, that you did not like the education system and like you
yeah.
you weren't like feeling that they are feeding you the right knowledge. I can relate to that because here in Hungary, I feel like universities, especially, I learned IT and programming, software programming, and I felt like
Yeah.
they are giving you this very strict knowledge and they are not letting you like embrace your own ideas. You know, they were very strict what you have to learn in order to be a programmer, like, right? So they
Yeah.
put you in a
I'm,
box of like, this is a programmer and you cannot go beyond that box, right? So it was crazy to me to
yeah.
see that, and it killed my motivation. So I ended up being like a writer after that. So because
The
that
way I
was
would
my other
describe,
passion.
yeah, I think that makes sense as a reaction. It's hard to compare how the schools might have been, but the way I would describe Berkeley back then is there was a lot of choice, right?
I
So
see.
it's not like I was being forced to do one exact
I
thing.
see. I
There
see. I
was a
see.
lot of choice, but then I would go take these classes and I would see that they were kind of dumb and irrelevant. So like, hey, I like programming languages. Let me take the compilers class, and it's doing this like dragon book thing. People who see my stream will know how low of an opinion I have of the Dragon book. It's what a lot of schools even still use to teach compilers. Um, but it was all this like useless, kind of horrible, like, can you learn about this parsing technique that nobody should ever use? And can you like, you know, convert can you convert an NFA to a DFA on paper for the test and all the, and I just didn't care about any of it because it had nothing to do, because I knew, because I had discovered the joy of programming for myself when I was very young. I knew what that was. I knew what
Yeah.
this like valuable kernel was
Yeah.
at the center of it. And then you go, on the one hand, this education was very useful because I saw all these sophisticated things that were much more, you know, I'm just going to use the word sophisticated again because I don't know, but they were much more sophisticated than what I had been doing on a home computer. But at the same time, the way it was being taught in the university was completely devoid of any of this exploration or
Exactly.
excitement
Yeah. Being
or
creative about it.
yeah, or just discovering, you know, um, and so it was very dead in a way. It was dead is how I would describe it. And
True.
I couldn't have told you this back then because I didn't understand it this well. I only understand it this well because I left college and I went back to a very live environment where I was figuring things out and discovering new things, and I was on the edge of video games, right? And that was great. I mean, it was also horrible because we were poor for like 4 years. But
That's the
um,
sacrifice, I guess, right?
definitely a sacrifice. It was not an intending sacrifice, but it was. But again, that was my best learning experience.
Was it a scary
You know,
decision, by the way, to leave university for you?
no, I mean, I thought about it a little bit.
I see.
Like, is this the right decision? But I also felt like, so a lot of these, again, I don't know how it is over there, but here in the U.S., if you did that and then you wanted to come back to school a year later or something, they would just take you back and let you pick up where you left off. So it's not the most scary decision
I see.
ever. Uh, but I felt no need to ever go back, right? So, and I'm in good company there. Like, there's a lot of the famous computer people who you could think of don't have college degrees.
Yeah, it's
Sometimes it's
true.
because,
It's true.
sometimes it's because they never even went to
Don't
college.
do,
Sometimes it's
kids,
because they
please
dropped
don't
out.
do this at home, right? We can say so.
Well, I don't know. Here's the thing.
I'm just
Again,
joking.
maybe this is how it's different between the U.S. and Europe. School is so expensive in the United States now because there's a combination of the way the government subsidizes it, plus it just became the expectation for most middle class people that they would be getting one of these degrees. And just colleges realized they could raise the price and people would pay it, right?
It's true.
And then they could use this to hire a lot of useless administrative people that don't do anything. And
True,
so
true, true.
the I mean, this is okay. So this is before inflation and all this. But so I was born in California, University of California at Berkeley, which was one of the better computer science schools in the country. I don't know if it still is, uh, but that's an in-state California school. So I got the in-state price for tuition. Um, my first semester, I want to say it was $832, but maybe that was the second semester. But it was in that range for the, and then they started raising the price even back then. So the third semester it was like 1,000 something and whatever. Um, Now again, that's before all this crazy inflation the government has caused, and it's before a lot of things. But so multiply it even by like three. Imagine going to an awesome computer science school for $2,500 a semester. Like that's unheard of, I think now. And so this stuff is just it's incredibly more expensive, but at the same time, the value of the information is maybe somewhat lower because again, all this information is on the internet. Now, maybe there's also a lot of garbage on the internet, but there's also a lot of garbage in the school. So, you know, what I think it like the value proposition has decreased. It doesn't make as much sense. It's not as unambiguous now that you should go to a university if you want to be a good programmer. Um, Whereas back then, it just made sense to do. But yeah, like a lot of people. So I'm about the same age as John Carmack, right? I'm about the same age as some other people. And, but when I was still in college, right, figuring out programming because I took such a slow track, like John Carmack was like releasing Doom, right? He had done this very tight iteration of like building stuff and learning and building better stuff. They did their 2D games and then Wolfenstein 3D and then Doom, like while I was sitting there getting a slow ass education, right? So maybe it would have been much better for me to do things the way he did. I don't know, right?
I see. I see.
Probably, probably would have been better. But again, there was this weird thing where I wasn't quite connected up enough, or I didn't quite have enough personal initiative to figure it out, right? So who knows?
I see.
But yeah, in the USA at least, a large percentage of the famous computer people that you look up do not have college degrees, way more than chance. It's not chance, it's actually positively correlated with success. So think about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I believe that the reason behind this is that those people who quit university and started to like follow their own path, they are more likely to like go down on that road in order to like pursue all the informations and knowledge that school might not teach to you, right? So it's like that I mentioned before, it's that box that they are trying to put you in, so you won't be that successful, right? And you will be able to work for big companies. So it's like I feel like it's intentional from them to do that. So they give you these dreams that you can be the best programmer in the world, right? And you will be one of the best writers, or I don't know, the best actors, but you won't, because like you are limited to that knowledge that they are giving you. I believe in
Yeah.
mentorship. So it's weird, by the way, because I believe in mentorship. I always say that in order to grow as a person with your knowledge and talent, you will need a mentor who already did and who already had success in his or her life, right? So they can teach you what mistakes you should not take on your road. But also, like being in a school, you will never know which mentors you will have, right? So you will might end up in a school where there are no good mentors, right? So it's
You
that's the
might.
case.
And the other thing is the reason you're in the school is because you don't know what's good.
Exactly,
So
exactly,
you don't know
exactly.
how to pick a good
Exactly.
mentor
And how would you
necessarily.
know what is good for you, right? And
Yeah.
how will you know what is a good and high level quality
And
knowledge that you can gain
this
from
is
people,
why,
right?
so it's not that often that I get really angry, but one of the things in life that makes me just incredibly angry is these people who are like fake teachers, right?
Fake
And there's a lot of
gurus.
this on the
Yeah.
internet. Yeah, who like will claim to be the mentor who knows everything or
Yeah,
whatever. And
yeah,
then you
yeah.
look
And
at
they sell it as well, right? So they
yeah,
sell it.
or even just professors at schools or
Yeah,
whatever, because
yeah.
this is one of the things, like I feel like on the one hand some of the time I spent at the university was good. On the other hand, it was kind of a waste of like at least 3 of those years was wasted
True.
ultimately. That's a long time when you're really young. And
True.
I'm kind
True.
of angry about it at some level. I
I
don't know.
wasted 6 years at university, so I can relate to
Yeah.
that.
So yeah. And
It wasn't a waste, to be honest. It wasn't a waste because I learned a lot as well, and I developed
well,
my
yeah,
personality as well. So it wasn't like a waste, but still,
I,
I could figure out a lot of the things on my own too, right? So it was
yes.
like,
And that was okay. So you were saying before that the people are not going to be the best programmer from what they learn in school. I agree with that. However, I did come out of school a much better programmer than I went in. A little bit of that, a fair amount of it was from classes. It could have been much more efficient, but a fair amount of it was from classes. But a lot of it, again, was because I would go to the computer lab and there were better computers than I had access to at home. I still, like, I had a Commodore 128 when I went to college, right? And then now I'm sitting down on a workstation class computer running Unix with like 50 users logged in. And it's like a whole different experience, right? And you're like, oh, computers could be like this.
true,
It
true.
doesn't have to be this thing that crashes every time you miswrite an assembly instruction or whatever. So, but most of how much better I became, I think, was just from me doing my own projects in the computer lab, which was aided by the education. So, like, I would take the compiler class, I would decide that most of it was stupid and made me depressed, but it still gave me enough of a starting point that I could go do my own compiler stuff
True.
and figure it out, right? And so it's really hard to value these things, but it's very obvious if you gave me the ability to design a computer science school, I think I could do a much better job if the goal is teaching students. Now, of course, the other thing about these institutions is teaching students is not really the point.
True.
It's like
True.
sort of an afterthought, and that's maybe
True.
why they're not that good at it, right?
True.
Um, yeah, I don't know. All
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, but it's
that's enough
sad
talking
because
about school,
like
maybe.
it's sad because like I remember myself how hyped I was like at the first semester at university about like learning programming, you know. And then
Yeah.
my motivation got killed totally at the end of the 6 years. So like it was like crazy. Like I realized that hey, I don't want to do this anymore. And I might be going back to like programming at some point of my life. Who knows? But like I don't know.
So
It
for
was a
six
crazy
years,
experience, and it was a sad experience as well because like I felt like I am not good enough, you know, and I
mhm.
wanted to be better, but I felt like they are teaching me in some ways which like they want me to do this, but what if I would like to do this? And they couldn't answer me. So I had classes where like we had to draw like cubes and we had to color them in C++. And I remember then when like we wanted like to do other shapes, they told us not to do that because it's harder and we won't understand it. And I was like, why? Like you are the teacher, you should explain it to me, right? So it was like,
yeah, that's where you realize the teacher probably doesn't know how to do that, right? They just know
yeah,
the cubes because that's what was
yeah,
in the book.
exactly, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
and then you're like,
exactly,
why am I could read the book myself,
exactly,
you know?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's sad, like I said, because it totally killed throughout all those years my motivation that I had at the very first semester. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
By the way, I
who knows?
believe that all of us creators who make our own crafts, let's focus on the games now. Going back to your games that you made, we always tend to put our inner self into the craft we make. Is this statement of mine true for your games that you made? Because I
Yeah, for
believe
sure.
so. I've seen your games. I've seen a lot of like your interviews. You talked about your games, but I believe so because like you, when you were talking about like this mentality of yours that you on your journey of your life, you always try to explore everything, every knowledge. You also had this mentality in your games, right? In Braid and The Witness as well.
Yeah, I mean, I work really hard to make the games good, but also, I have to be really interested in what I'm making, which for me means there has to be something about it that I don't understand yet. Like
I
I'm
see.
expanding my own knowledge
I see.
in the process of making the thing,
I
right?
see.
And when you put all that together, it's a really, it's a really transformative experience. Like you're interested in something, you don't understand what it is yet, you work on it really hard for some number of years, and then you come out the other side a different person, like every time, right? Like I'm a different person at the end of Braid than at the beginning, and then I'm a different person at the end of Witness, and I'm a very different person now, even than then. And it's just really interesting. And, for me, that's what I want to play. Like, I want to play games by people who cared that much because I think it does make them better. Like, I feel it when I play things. And the thing is, it's actually pretty hard to find games where people really actually cared that much about making them. Um, I mean, people will tell you that they cared, but then you play it and you're like, well, why? It would have taken you like 2 hours to make this thing a lot better. Why didn't you do that? And they just, they didn't care enough to do those two
I
hours,
see.
right?
I see.
So I don't know. It's, it's hard. I don't find that many games these days that I really want to play. Once in a while, something comes out, but like, we're in this time when more games than ever are released to Steam like every day, and I almost don't want to play any of them because I don't see the point. But there are some that are good once in a while, and that's great when that happens.
I see. I see. What was your favorite part of designing these games and making these games, by the way, throughout the process of making them?
There's always, this is actually maybe what is happening right now, even, or a few months ago on the new game, but there's always some time when the main game is kind of figured out and I've got a lot of the levels or the puzzles or whatever it is.
I see.
And then I want to make the something cool for the ending or a cool area in the game. And I go off and I do something extremely extra that didn't have to be there, right? So in Braid, this was like the actual ending level of the game. I had a really great time designing that, and it didn't take that long to make the initial version of it. And then I was like, wow, oh, this is a really cool idea that I'm excited about, right? So for people who haven't played it, most of the levels are, you're solving a puzzle to get a puzzle piece that you collect and put together. And then you do enough of this and it gets you to the ending level where it's a little bit similar to the levels you've been playing, but something very different is happening. And it ties back into the theme of the game and all these things, right? And so for Braid, the initial design of that was really fun and interesting. For The Witness, there was a couple of those because that was a really long development. One of them was, hey, I'm starting to do the end game, so I'm going to do all these puzzles in the mountain. Spoilers for people who haven't played it, you can get in the mountain. Um, and let's do all these crazy, like, this puzzle spans the whole room and there's like laser bridges and stuff. And like none of that really had to be in the game. Like the game could have just been these puzzle panels and the other stuff that's in it, right? But it was like, okay. And then I think it was maybe the year after that or something. I was like, okay, I want to build out secret areas in the game. Let me do this speed run thing. And I just over Christmas I did this and I got so into it, like there's a speed run, there's like music that you have to finish the run before the music ends. None of that had to be in the game. But then like I wanted a timer, but it seemed wrong because the game doesn't use written language ever. It doesn't tell you how to do the puzzles or anything. But I wanted to have a timer for the speed run. And so I was like, I wonder if I can use the puzzle language to make a timer. So there's like a really cryptic timer count up that tells you how many minutes and seconds it's been, but you kind of have to decode it to understand that that's what it is. And so that's a cool. So I just got super into this thing. Um, and then on this game, uh, the game is so big, like there's so much stuff in it. But again, I had this problem with the end. We had this idea for much of development of what the end games would be, and then I got there and I was like, okay, but they're just maybe not special enough actually. And so starting about almost a year ago, although I was busy with a lot of other things too, but I was like, okay, we need to figure out how to make these more special. And then probably starting in October of last year, I did this for one of the endings. I figured out, okay, oh, if we do this and this and this, it's like what you've been playing, but it raises it up another level and it's extra cool and that, but there's 3 endings for the game. So like literally right now from day to day, I'm working on the final ending. Spoilers, there's more than one ending. And then I think that'll give me the information for the middle ending as well. But yeah, it's these times that's the most fun and exciting. It's also, I think, the runner up for what's most fun and exciting is just early in development
I see.
because you start and you just have ideas, but you don't have that much down. You don't have a running program yet, right? And just early on, if you're a reasonable programmer, right, or maybe you're a designer and there is a reasonable programmer on the team, because there's nothing there yet, it's actually very easy to make progress very quickly, right? Because you're not you're not stumbling over all the code that already exists, and you're not like, oh, I want to add this, but how does that interoperate with this other thing or whatever, right? So both with Braid and the Witness, like there was an initial prototype in like a week. Maybe for the Witness it was 2 weeks because it's 3D and it's more complicated. But like you could get the basics of the game and it's playable, and that's a really good time. The problem is right after that time, it's really not fun at all because then the thing that you have, even though it was really great to get the idea down and be excited about it, now you start seeing all the ways in which it's not very good yet, and you all the things you're going to have to fix already start piling up, and you look at the to-do list from there to the end and it starts getting rough. Right, it's like, oh my god, there's so much to do. But yeah, that's also a good time, is the very beginning.
Which comes
But for me,
first?
that's not my favorite time. My favorite time is and maybe this is just a me thing, maybe not that many designers do this, but my favorite time is when I have the basic game and I go way above and beyond the Call of Duty to do something crazy in it. That for me is the most rewarding.
You mentioned, by the way, endings and having the gameplay figured
Yeah.
out at the first place. But which comes first, like the story, the theme, or the gameplay when you design your games?
For me, it's always there's a basic idea that has to come
I
first.
see. I see.
Sometimes that comes with story. So with Braid, that actually kind of came with a lot of the story idea, but for the later games, it hasn't been that way.
I see.
This new game has a lot of story in it. It doesn't yet. I've got a lot of notes for the story, but this new game is going to have way more story than either Braid or The Witness. And uh, but it took me till the end to understand how to make it actually be good, you know. And maybe part of that is having too many things to think about. Because like you got to design the game, both in broadly speaking, what is it and why does anyone want to play this, and then you have to design individual puzzles. You have to like run the team, and you have to like make sure there's money in the company, and you have to figure out who to hire. There's so many things to think about.
True. True.
Um, and if you can offload some of that stuff as a creative person, that's great. But for me, I was never in a position where like the reason I'm doing all this stuff is because I didn't see any other way to make the games I wanted to make. Like absolute, like The Witness was a very profitable game in the end. It made way more money than Braid actually, despite like Braid is sort of better known because it depends who you talk to, but Braid is sort of better known in history because it like sort of helped mark that like kickoff of the indie
In this scene,
games.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes. But The Witness, way more people have played, and it made way more money. Um, but uh, what was my point there? I had a point. I just started thinking about all these things. What was I saying right before there?
My
I
question
hope I'm
was
not
like,
getting old and
what
cinematic.
comes first, like the story or the gameplay and the
Oh,
theme? And you answered that. You started answering
yeah.
that.
I forget why I was comparing the two games, relatively speaking, though. I have so much to think about every day.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's
It's okay.
oh well no, that's why I was saying it. That's why I was saying it. I was saying it because so the reason like when I started making The Witness, it was such a wacky weird idea. Nobody would have funded it. That's the thing. It was this very financially successful game. Nobody would have funded it. Um so I kind of just had to make the whole infrastructure to make it happen on my own. Like I had to make the company and hire the people
I see.
and build the engine. Like now you could probably do The Witness in an off the shelf game engine, but in 2009 when I started the project, it was like, look, we wanted to use global illumination to help define the look of the game because it's very important for things that we want to do. And you couldn't there's no such thing as a game engine that did good global illumination for you at that time and did the things that so like you'll be in a dark room and you'll open a door to the outside and it'll light up. But why? Because we baked multiple versions of the map for that room and it's hooked up to the door and it like cross blends when the door opens and like we were doing that stuff in like 2010 or 2011 when um, that technology was just not available generally, right? Now, by the time the game was out in 2016, it was starting to be available at a decent quality level, but okay, then you would have to start your game in 2016, right?
True.
Like years later than we started it. So, yeah, I don't, it's just that like, I really wish I could focus more just on design or just programming or
I see.
whatever,
I see.
but I don't see an option right now to do that.
I see.
Um, and every time I try to hand off control of the company, something bad happens and it doesn't go well. And so, like at the start of this project, I tried a lot more to give authority to people in the team to make good decisions. And it really didn't work because it really, like, you can't just pick people who have done an okay job programming or an okay job doing art stuff or whatever and give them more authority and have it work. It's weird. Like, people kind of have to naturally grow into that authority, and that's how
True.
you know that you can give it to
True.
them,
True.
right?
True. I
And
agree with that. Yeah.
that has happened in some cases, but in a lot of cases it really didn't work. um, so I don't, but I would like to fix that problem. I don't know how to fix it. Maybe you just have to be way more careful hiring people. That's something I'm going to do no matter what, is just be way more careful hiring people. Um, Also, in this modern day, when we're running a remote company, which didn't used to be how it is, and everyone we hire now is somewhere random in the world. And that just makes it different and harder to coordinate. And it makes it, I don't know, it makes it harder to get people really working solidly on a game.
True. True.
Um,
Like there is no
it was
personal
really,
connection.
don't underestimate that problem. Like, we have this problem in a significant way where we didn't have it before, back when we were working on The Witness, for example. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned, by the way, having messages in your games. I believe that like every game has its own message by his or her creator, right? Who made that game. What was the
Yeah.
message of Braid and what was the message of Witness? If you can talk
Well,
about
I
it.
don't. Here's the thing. I have two things to say about that. One is, I don't like to think about it that way,
Okay.
because if you do think about it that way, like I was taught in school, talking about how bad school is, right? In our literature classes in grade school, we would be taught like, hey, you can read this book and then let's decipher what the message is. And the message would always be something simple that you could say in like one or two sentences, right? Like, oh, you should be
No, I
good to
don't
your
think it's
friends
true. I
because then
don't
they'll
think
be
it's
good to
true.
you,
Yeah, but
or
that's what I
but
disagreed with my literature teacher. Sorry for interrupting you. I
yeah, go
remember
ahead.
our literature teacher said the same, and I always said that we've always been taught at the literature class here in Hungary that you, as a consumer of the poems that we read, will never
Yeah,
be able to like read out the exact feelings of the creator of the poem. And I
yeah,
always argued with my teacher because I believe that there will be only a few people who will be able to relate and resonate the same feeling that the creator had. Maybe on the one hand, on the one side of the same coin, because the
yeah,
consumer of that poem might be in the same life situation that the creator was in, or
yeah,
maybe they are so sensible enough and educated in a sensible way to resonate with that like message. So when I was asking
yeah,
about the message, I really meant like not the like the standard message that you were talking about that teachers told you or me at school, but
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
message or rather the feeling that the creator
Well,
has.
that's the thing, and so I don't like to think about it in terms of message for this reason that you just explained, right? So I think we both agree there completely. Um, the way that I learned to think about it, and the best way that I can explain it, video games are so hard to make, right? Or even just think of something simpler to understand, like a big novel, right?
True,
Like
true,
Anna
true,
Karenina or something,
true,
right?
true, true.
That was not easy to write that thing. It's really long and complicated, and everything has to make sense and work out, and it has to be great, right? And like, if you haven't done it, maybe you don't understand. But like to be an artist going into making that thing that's that big and having it be good, it's really hard. And you wouldn't do it. Like if your message was one of these trite things, like we're saying it isn't, um, you wouldn't write 1,000-page great novel to say this 2-sentence trite thing. Like that doesn't make any sense. Why would anybody do that for years to just make a little message,
I
right?
always say
So
that
what
there
it
are
really
branches
is,
of the simple things, right? That you would like to tell as a main message. Like it's just people
yeah,
want to simplify to understand the feeling that the creator
yeah.
had, in my
Well, and I
opinion.
think probably the people who started these educational systems understood this, right?
Exactly.
But then as it gets propagated through time, the teachers, it becomes like the people who don't know how to do more than the cube, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
that for literature. But once you try it, you understand that for an artist to work that hard on something, they really care about the whole thing. It's
Exactly.
like it's a big multi-dimensional thing.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
you're trying to make the thing. So David Lynch just died. He's a film director for people who don't know. He unfortunately smoked way too much, and characters in his films smoke all the time. And he got emphysema, which is a disease of the lungs which is very, very deadly. So that's unfortunate. But one of his films is my favorite film of all time, Mulholland Drive, which is an amazing movie because it was supposed to be a TV series originally. It was supposed to be like the new Twin Peaks. And so you're watching it and introduces all these characters and stuff. Um, some of which are really would have been really great in a TV show. And then they decided not to make the TV show. So he's like, what do I do? And he finished it as a movie. And but it's a great film and it's but it's great for reasons that are very difficult to articulate because it's very subtle and in between. Like the greatness is in between everything. And that's one of the things that David Lynch was really good at is like infusing things. So we have a phrase in English, more than the sum of its parts, right? When you put things together and then somehow when you put the things together, what you get is has some magic to it
I
that
see.
you wouldn't have expected.
I see.
And he was really great at that. Like really uh now that's not to say that I like everything that he did. I don't really, but um his best moments are really amazing when you can look at this thing and say, what is that and how is it so amazing, right? And so that's the kind of magic that I also aim for, in part because I learned from his movies. And so for me, the meaning part that you're talking about, even so, like I said before, I don't understand the whole thing when I start, right? There's always some mystery for me about why is this so interesting and how is it going to be magical. And so I start maybe with this thing that you're talking about where I have some ideas that I want to communicate and get across. So for The Witness, I won't totally spoiler it, but this core idea was something about uh, the moment of sudden understanding that you have when you solve a puzzle and it just comes to you, right? And that was very important to me. And so I built the game around that. And I didn't understand where that was going to go. And I did my best to encapsulate this magic in
I see.
between things. But part of that is every time you add something to the game, you try to really make sure uh, that it doesn't disrupt. So you try to really make sure it's on topic of both the thing that you understood in the beginning that you're making the game about, but also with the mysterious things that you don't understand yet. Like it's weird, even though you don't understand exactly what it is yet, you can feel when
It's
something's
the
totally
right thing
wrong.
to do, right? Or it's
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah.
Well, when it's wrong, it's really grating, and maybe I don't understand why, and I'm like, I don't know why I hate this, but I hate this, and we have to take it out of the game. Like I
Yeah,
do
but
that a
I
lot.
feel like it's intentional that we talked about, that feeling or that message will go into your projects, right? And it's true for
Yeah,
every creator, in my opinion. You cannot avoid it, right? So it's like
yeah,
you're not trying to lie in your project, but you're pouring your heart into it, and that's why it will be honest and having this message, like I mentioned it,
yeah.
or
But
feelings.
so that's what I try to do every time with the new game. There's a version of that. Like the game is at its fundamentally, it's about the way that game mechanics combine combinatorically when you hey, you have one object that behaves a certain way, you add another object. There's a way that magically happens, or not even magically, because I'll reserve the word magic for something deeper. But there's a way that that happens as a fundamental mechanism of the universe. Like
I see.
we as game designers are not making that combinatoric happen. We're using it. But like somehow the fundamental property of the universe at all scales is it's doing this thing all the time. Like people who know a little bit of physics may understand this idea that somehow across an incredible range of scale, everything is like the right degree of complexity. So, if the constants of nature were a little bit different, we wouldn't even have atoms, right? Because
True.
electrons would not stay bound. And then
True.
if some other constants were slightly different, we wouldn't have molecules.
True.
And then, you wouldn't have planets and you wouldn't have all these things. And we have all these complex layerings of interaction at all these scales. And you could say, well, that's what's necessary to have life, but we somehow have them going continually up and up. If you think of it if you think of the small scale as causal, which I think might be a mistake, but you could then say, oh, well, it makes sense that everything up to us had to be there or we wouldn't be here. But then you have all this incredible stuff happening at scales bigger than us, which you could sort of hand wave and say, like, well, it's because supernovas were happening hundreds of light years away that we have heavy elements on this planet and all that. But you kind of could also imagine simpler ways for that to have happened, right? And so um, it's just uh, somehow the universe just does this. And it's not well understood why. So there's a research institute here in the US, there's probably some elsewhere, called the Santa Fe Institute, which was founded by some interesting thinkers, including Murray Gell-Mann, who's one of the most famous physicists. And they study complexity and like what even is complexity and why is it everywhere? And what can you understand about it and what can you do with it is like it's just a really interesting topic. And so that's uh, what that's what this game is about at some level. And so every decision that we make has to be congruent with that and has to not fight that. It has to contribute to that. And at the same time, the magical part for me that I don't understand is this part. So the game mechanical part is actually in some sense very easy to understand. Look, I made a guy who teleports and his teleportation bounces off mirrors once you add mirrors, and that's easy to understand, right? Okay. But this somehow this connection with the universe that is doing this all the time at such an incredible volume and depth and rate that it's completely in your mind would just explode if you even tried to understand a little bit of it, right? um that's where the mystery lies, is in that connection, that an insane amount of this is happening all the time, and yet you can distill down this little bit of it and focus on it into like an abstracted form where it makes sense to your brain. And so not to spoiler too much, but that's what this game is about, both in the near field what I understand and in the far field like what
I
I
see.
don't understand.
I see.
And so that's the best answer that I can give to you, is that for every game there's something like that. There's a part that I understand, there's a part that I don't understand. and I do my best. I do my best to struggle with it in the process of making the game, you know.
I see. I remember, by the way, myself playing Braid, and when I got to know at a younger age who made Braid, I
Yeah.
always like asking myself whether this person wanted to go back in time to fix his problems. Is this question of mine was true back then when I played your game
I
as a
mean, I
kid?
don't know. Like I think that's something everybody might think about a little bit, but for me that wasn't the motivation for the game.
I
That
see.
was more like part of the fiction,
I
right?
see. I
In
see.
one place. The motivation was more about having these little universes where time behaves differently. And so
I see.
the reason the story starts with going back is because that was like the simplest mechanism that underlies the whole game.
I see.
But I wouldn't think of it, I don't personally think of it as the most important idea. But you know, when you present something and something comes first, it's easy for people to think of it as the most important idea. Also, you're just doing it through the whole game. You're rewinding all the time.
True. True.
But to
True.
go back to the David Lynch part a bit, it would be very difficult on the surface to find any link at all between Braid and like a David Lynch movie because um, they're just really they're different media and different stylistically and just so different in so many ways. But at a deep level, his stuff was inspiring me before that game. So like this film Mulholland Drive came out before I started working on Braid, like just before. I think it came out in 2004. Um, and so there's a little homage. I don't think this is really documented very many places, but it's a very, very subtle reference. But in this last level that I was talking about, you can actually read the address on the post box going into the house, and that's the same number as the address of the house in Mulholland Drive.
Hmm.
There's like a house that's kind of mysterious where some stuff happens at the end, um, and it was just my way of giving a nod to something that had been inspirational.
I see.
That, but where the inspiration is not obvious in any way to anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that hidden message that I was asking, right? That's might not be resonating with others because they do not have the same like experience
Yeah.
and the influence that you
But
had,
that's
right?
not, so that kind of thing, it's cute when we put it in a game, but that's also not that important, right? Like if
It's
that
important
mailbox
for
didn't
you, for
have a
the
number on
creator,
it.
right? So,
Yeah.
and if
But
somebody
like it's
resonates with it, it's even better feeling for you, right? So,
yeah, but that one is intentionally so cryptic that almost nobody would ever understand it, right?
I see.
So, yeah. It's not intended to be understood by anyone.
True, true,
I'll
true,
put it
true.
that way.
Okay. You have mentioned also like throughout the projects and finishing your projects, you always changed as a person. How have you
Yeah.
changed as a person in other territories of your own life from making video games for so many years?
It's going to be hard for me to say anything very meaningful
Okay.
there. I can say some general things that are maybe stereotypical. Um, well, okay. Obviously, I'm just a lot better at making games than I was. I'm just way better after everyone. I can do things way faster. I can do things that are much more sophisticated. I can design. I have much better design ideas. So one of the things we've been doing in the middle of this project is we worked on the anniversary edition of Braid. And at first I thought it was just going to have commentary and better graphics. But then I realized, and the reason I thought it was just going to be commentary and better graphics is because after I finished Braid, I felt like, oh wow, I did a really good job exploring these game mechanics, and I I did basically everything you can do with this. Like there's maybe some other puzzles, but they're not very good, blah, blah, blah. And I thought that would be true for years. And then I went back to do the puzzles for Braid Anniversary Edition. And it was very easy to have new ideas without implementing any new mechanic at all and do stuff that the original game didn't do. That was, and what I would have told you about Braid at the time was that the game got better, and we say this in the commentary, the game got better as it became more focused on the puzzle ideas and minimal. But what I thought was a focused and minimal puzzle idea back then is not as focused as I know how to make things now. And so I made these anniversary edition puzzles uh, that are all new, and they're extremely focused, and they could have been made back then, but I just didn't know how to make them. And now
See.
I know how to make them, and they're better than a lot of the puzzles in the original game. And I literally designed them all in like 2 weeks, right? Like that's how much better you can get as a designer. Uh, I mean, I kept refining them a little bit. Like some of them needed some tweaks and stuff, but like getting the basic puzzles down was like 2 weeks. To design, I forget how many exactly there are. There's 16 puzzle pieces. Some levels have 2 puzzle pieces, so it's something like 10 to 12 levels. But then, sometimes there's commentary levels that sort of have puzzles in them and stuff. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just got a lot better as a designer. So like you should get better, right?
True,
If you keep
true,
doing
true,
something, you
true,
should get better
true,
at it.
true.
But I'm also like more mature in some other way that is harder to quantify. Like I'm definitely battle hardened. Like making games is really hard. It's really hard. And the main reason, well, there's multiple reasons. One is just they're just so complicated, and there's all these things you have to do, and if the things aren't hooked together exactly right, it's like a box full of springs where you tried to close the lid and you didn't quite, and everything explodes,
True.
right? So that's what making a game is like. When it gets complicated. I mean, anyone can make like Pac-Man now, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. But the other thing is like, okay, so it's very complicated, but again, you have this artistic impulse to not just make it good, but to do a very specific thing, right? We're trying to be on the theme that we're exploring. We're trying to be in a certain space, and that gets harder and harder as games get bigger, honestly. Um, I'm actually looking forward. This game we're doing now is probably the biggest thing that I will ever work on in terms of handmade content, and I'm looking forward to going back to smaller things after this because oh man, it is really hard to do artistic integrity when things get so big that they don't really fit in your head anymore. And you have to have more people helping and all this stuff. It's just like it's really hard. Um, but in struggling with that, I've become much better even at that, right?
I see.
So I feel good. Like, let's say nobody buys this next game. I hope lots of people buy it, and we spent so much money on it. Oh my god, it's so expensive. But um, you know, let's just say I become one of these people you read about in history who was working really hard on their stuff, and it wasn't appreciated in their time, and they get politically on the wrong side of somebody, and then they die poor, from a disease, right? That could be me. I'm
Hopefully, it
very
won't
aware
happen,
that could
right?
be me. It
Hope-
might happen though. It's realistic.
yeah.
Um,
Sadly, I would say. Yeah. It's again history
but
repeats itself, right? So
if that happens, it's okay because there's a certain kind of fulfillment that can only be known by artists and craftspeople who worked really hard at their art and craft. And I have gotten that. And I hope I get more of it, but I've gotten a whole lot of that. And it's very difficult to explain to anyone else who hasn't also done it. Because why is it satisfying? What does it mean? Right? What do you mean this is satisfying? I'm looking at you from third person and I can't tell anything different, right? But like, it is really like if you're looking for meaning in life, it is a very significant source of meaning. It's certainly not the only one. Don't misinterpret this as saying it's the only one, but it is a significant source of meaning in life. And um when you're in the middle of the trenches working hard, you don't really notice that this is happening. Because it's just like, oh my God, you know, somebody wants a raise and somebody else is quitting, and we haven't figured out how to make the story good, and somebody's trying to do story stuff, but it's terrible and it's going to make the game bad. Like all these things happen. Um, and you're just working so hard trying to make it good that you're just busy in the middle. But then you come out the other side of it, and hopefully you've done a good job and haven't betrayed your artistic motivations, right? And as long as that has been true, then you come out the other side, you're like a more experienced fighter or something, right? It's like, okay, next fight I'm in an even better position. But not just fighter, like I mean that in two ways. Like you fought to make the thing even ever happen in the first place, and you got better at that. But then also just in terms of like the art part of the martial art, it's like you just have an understanding of the world that came through the art that people who haven't done the art don't have. And that's just a valuable part of being a human being in the world, and it's hard to explain why. And
True.
I even before this project, I'm not sure I could have explained why. Um, but yeah, that's that's what has made me a different person,
I see.
and it's hard to explain.
Thank you for your honesty about this topic. I believe so. By the way, that this is a forever ongoing process that you mentioned, right? So it's
Yeah, I don't
like
think there's an ending
it
to
it
it.
it, it never stops. Like we all as humans, we always say that there is a goal, but there isn't a goal in my opinion. Like even if like we are pursuing knowledge or power or anything, but yeah. And I feel like the
Yeah, I
more
mean,
knowledge. Sorry for
yeah,
interrupting you. I just wanted to say that even if we are like pursuing more knowledge and we are getting more clever in the field that we are in, because we are passionate
yeah,
about it, we still end up in a position where like knowing nothing about it, right? Because it evolves with us as well, so it's like forever
sure.
ongoing process with it. And there is a quote about it that the more you learn, the and the more clever you will be, also the dumber you will be, or something like that,
Yeah,
because you
yeah,
will realize how big it is, right? So
yeah. The thing is, our human minds are pretty small compared to the universe as a whole. Um, and so the idea of a goal is an idea that we have. It's not really reflective of the structure of the universe in
true,
any
true,
way.
true. Do you think it's
But
a
it
good
could be
thing, by the way?
useful.
Do you think it's a good thing that we are
It
restricted
can
in
be,
this standard box that you
I
told about?
don't know. I mean, it is what we are, right? And so it doesn't matter if it's good. Again, good is in some sense, in the way that we understand good or bad, is also a human concept,
True,
right?
true, 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 true.
And so it's totally fine. Like I want to make things that are good for my definition of good, and I want to reach my goals for whatever those are, and it's good. As a human being, it's probably good to want good and to have goals because otherwise you're not a very good human being. You
Yeah,
don't
but these goals
reach
are made
your
up by
flourishing.
humans, by us, right?
But
So it's
they are
like not,
contextual.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And and that's a very difficult thing to grapple with correctly because again, you can be like one of these nihilists like some people are and say, "Oh, because these goals are contextual and are only within the human context, therefore they're meaningless and the world is pointless and whatever." But that's actually excessive. That's a kind of a disease of thinking you understand too much. And because again, when you say therefore it's meaningless and empty or whatever a nihilist will say, there's no point to something. Those things you're saying are also pictures that your mind is making for you, right? So you're rejecting one thing as being invalid because your mind is making this picture, but then you're embracing other pictures that your mind is making also, and those are very negative pictures. And if you suspend that also, if you say, okay, well, that's not correct either because those are just also human pictures. if you just let yourself float in not completely understanding, that's a very productive space to be.
True, true, true. I remember, by the
So,
way, an example to this topic. A professor showed us at university. It was like two pools in each other, and the one pool was bigger than the second pool. The second pool was smaller, and in the second pool, which was smaller, there was a rubber duck, and he told us that the rubber duck can see the outside corners of the bigger pool, but he cannot go into that, and he might
yeah.
see a third pool which is bigger, and they like in each other. So there is this containing method of like all pools are in each other, and the rubber duck is in the middle of the smallest pool and can see all the corners, might be able to see all the corners of the bigger pools. And the rubber duck actually is in the bigger pools, right? Because it's simple math if you think about it, but still cannot go out to the corner from the first pool. So it's also like
Right.
limiting our knowledge that you mentioned, that it can be depressive, but that's how people end up being depressive about like these pointless goals, or that you mentioned, because like they see that there might be like a bigger pool that they can jump in, and they might jump into that bigger pool. But if you figure it out, you're already in that bigger pool. You just see the corners of that bigger pool that you could jump in, right? Because that's the containing method of the math. I'm not sure what it is called in English, but like containing each other.
Yeah. I don't know if we have a specific word for that, but the example is very clear. And I think that's a very useful model. I don't
Yeah,
have anything to add to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. You mentioned, by the way, hard parts about making your games. What was the hardest part so far of making your games? Or
So the hardest part has been the way the world got disrupted a few years ago and all these things. Because so when I did Braid, it was mostly me, but then some people helped out for substantial portions of development. The most major one being David Hellman, who worked on the game for like a year and a half doing all the art stuff. Um, the Witness was a bigger project right away. It wasn't just me. We had a team of probably 3 or 4 people to start. I mean, it was gradually growing the whole time, right? But uh, that was um, pretty. It was a hassle to figure out how to keep all that together and make it go, and it was very hard sometimes. I felt, but it still there was some way in which it fundamentally worked. Like it wasn't crazy to try to have people in a room working on the same game. But then something happened where, this coronavirus disease got released into the world, and then everybody overreacted to it, probably, or let's just say reacted in bad ways that didn't help mostly, and shut the economy down and demoralized a bunch of people and made them depressed. And but then also maybe that just accelerated some things that were already going to happen eventually, such as all this remote work and all that.
yeah,
But then it turns out remote work is actually it's very difficult to, like, when we started doing remote work in the US, you heard all this propaganda about how it was more efficient and it's great because you don't have to pay for as much office space and everybody gets as much work done from home and they're happier, and like none of that's true actually.
sadly, yeah.
It's way harder. People are, in general, on average, much less effective
True,
at remote work.
true,
And there's probably a bunch of things that you can do to help fix that. But there's a limit to probably how much you can do, which is why a lot of these big companies are requiring people to come back to work now. I forget, like, was it Amazon who just said they're going to do that with all their full time employees? And the reason is because, look, people don't actually do very much work if they're not in a structure that helps them do that. And
true.
there's
It's
a
very
limit.
true. Yeah,
There's a limit to how much structure you can provide when you're not in the same place. And so we're fighting that all the time. But all these things, so that happened. The COVID demoralizing people and making them depressed, and there's a limit to how much I can do about that. And then this going remote making everything harder. And at the same time, we make our own game engines and stuff, and that requires a certain skill level of programmer. And while all this other stuff was happening, even before this, even during the witness time, this started happening, but it got really intense around 2017 to 2019, was just in the greater technology industry, the salaries were getting insane. So like, how do you hire a good programmer if they can go do nothing at Twitter and make, $400,000 a year, which is insane, right? That's like,
Sure.
um, I mean, I'm thinking about several years ago, so I have to adjust the numbers, but that's like 8 times the average salary in the United States. 8 times the average. It's really high to like essentially have no programming skills and do nothing. And so how do you make an indie game and like hire people when all these companies are eating up all the programmers? And by the way, that's kind of a bad thing for those programmers because they're probably never going to be good now. They'll have a lot of money, but like they won't learn how to be good
They will stop
programmers
at a
or do
knowledge
anything
level.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so all these things happened at once. And so it's like a big bomb went off where when I started this project, I was like, look, we're just going to kind of do it like The Witness. And I know how to do that now. And I know how to run that team. And everything changed. And it's been so hard to just keep a team together working on a game and not going out of business. I will say, um, this is a bigger game than The Witness, so it's not a surprise that it's more expensive, but it's still like more expensive than it should have been because of all these other factors as
I
well,
see. I
you
see.
know. Um, and then just like in addition to people being depressed, I'm just going to add to that the word demoralization. Like people broadly speaking, if you go way back in time, let's say like uh to the 1980s. I'll say that because I was starting to be an adult in the 1980s. So I know this is not harkening back to a fictional time that I didn't live in. But like in the 1980s, I think we were starting to get cynical in the US. For sure, my generation was, but we were just kids. Um, but it was it was a part of American culture that there was virtue in working hard at something and doing a good job, uh, to contribute to the world in some positive way.
Yeah.
Like that was called the work ethic, and it was the baseline. And then my generation sort of started this thing about being cynical about this and like, oh, you're just a wage slave and like whatever. And then this got somehow even more amplified because we weren't ever that serious about it. For us, it was like just kind of part of being ironic and sophisticated. But then you have the millennials and the Zoomers now who like very seriously believe that work is bad a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like it's just a bad thing to
Yeah.
work. And I think, again, this is the kind of statement that gets people attacking me on the internet, but I think there's maybe a gender difference there too, or certainly in the result. I think a lot of men might think that they're being smart and sophisticated by deciding it's bad to work. And I'm just going to be one of these people uh, who, just I don't know. I'm a cynical person who maybe I am working some job, but it's not important to me, and I'm just kind of making some money, and that's making me depressed that I'm wasting so many hours every day at work. And then I go on Twitter and I post snarky, cynical things.
I think it's it's
Um,
it's rather that it goes back to the studies of everyone, like to our studies at school. Like I think like everyone has a talent that they can pursue and they can bigger up their knowledge with. But I feel like schools do not bring to the table that options for those people who have all these knowledges in order to grow as a person with their knowledge. And they end up having in
yes,
these very bad situations and very bad jobs that you mentioned that they do not like because they are not like confident enough, as you uh, were talking about that before, that you gained confidence because you were like very passionate about your lifestyle and that you had a talent and a passion in, right? But there are so many
Yeah.
people who do not do that, and that's when the mentorship is important, in my opinion, to have a mentor who will tell you that, hey, you have this talent, and that's how you gain confidence. That's how you boost your confidence with experiencing and experimenting in that field of your knowledge, right? As I had so many friends around my life who had been very talented in some fields, and they
Yeah.
did not have the confidence to pursue it. They rather went to a very boring job, and they felt like these empty souls who are not giving anything to the society, and they are not giving anything back to themselves as well, because they always had that talent and their dream to pursue that talent, but they never had the confidence
Yeah,
enough
but
to
I'm saying actually two things that connect to what you're saying here. So one is, yes, maybe fewer people take this risk and know it's hard to think about. So if you go back to before computers, right? If you were a mechanic who worked on cars or something, um, even if you went up through the generic training that everybody would get, you knew how to work on cars. And you might not be taught like the most brilliant thing or whatever, but you're still doing a craft that you could be good at and take pride in and feel like, oh, this person couldn't drive yesterday and now I fixed their car, and that's an obvious improvement in the
true,
world, right?
true, true, true.
So there's some difference that has happened where now something about computers and software, especially, I think, is a lot more fake than that. Where if you go up through the standard educational system, you're learning these things. They're not as special as what the people are learning who are on the edges, but maybe that's always been true. But then when you go take your standard knowledge and apply it in a job, it's way more dead now because the job is kind of mostly fake. Like you're not
True.
probably doing
Yeah,
that much
I
from
agree
day to
with that.
day
Yeah, you're just
that you
making
could
small
see a difference in
segments
the
of the
world.
whole job, right?
Yeah, and
That
maybe the
used to
whole
be the
thing,
whole thing, right? Right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
maybe the whole thing doesn't even seem that good. So like, and this has been going on for a while. So there's some guy, I'm going to try not to identify him, but it was a guy who I was a friend with in college. So he went to college the same time as me, 80s to 90s. And then he went to do some more continuing advanced education. So he got like a master's or maybe even a PhD. I don't remember. Um, and then he went to work at a big, one of the more famous companies of the first .com boom, but maybe a little bit after the boom, right? And he was telling me one time, not that long, it was maybe 8 years ago, I don't know, but I was trying to talk to him about what he does at work, and he was like, I mostly programmed the functionality behind one button on it was a payment related website. And there was one button that he sort of made work. And he had like all these years of education, and I was in disbelief. I was trying to talk to him about like, do you not see how crazy that is? But he had also so integrated with this environment that like he didn't see how crazy it was.
True, true, true.
He was like, no, it makes sense that I work on one button. I'm just like, what
Yeah,
are you talking about?
yeah.
So, um, so that's so maybe for him, I don't know. He didn't seem that happy when I was talking to him. So maybe he was having a crisis of meaning and not sharing that. But certainly, as this gets more and more ridiculous, I think the jobs are more and more fake,
I agree
and
with that. Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's very it's very hard to take that kind of work ethic pride. And maybe that's why the culture is swinging away from this idea of work ethic and toward work is bad because all the work is so stupid and fake now.
Maybe. Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And maybe that's why people don't feel that much that way, like in China, for example, where they still build a lot of things. Because if you build something, you now have a thing. You can
True,
see what you did.
true,
You can see what the point of your time was, right?
true, true. It's more
And
physical,
if you
and you
just,
see it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, if you just type some characters into a file, and you know how flimsy that file is because it could be deleted at any minute, and then all the characters that you typed barely even do anything, maybe that's just different. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like we've beaten this topic into the ground, but
No, I agree with that,
this
by
is
the
a
way.
thing
I
that
agree
needs.
with that totally. Like you mentioned, by programming a button but not knowing anything else about
Here's I'll
programming.
go one step further actually. So historically, there aren't just people doing a job, but there's like somehow the people who are in charge of the profession and the reputation of the profession, and that might include some professors, that might include some people who are just like on the trade board for this, who set the ethical guidelines for the profession, right? And who write the mission statements of like what does it mean to be a civil engineer who designs bridges or something, right? It means you take this very seriously, and there's all these things that come with it. And with software, we don't really have that and have never had that. And maybe that's good because it's allowed software to develop in a certain way. But it also means that there's no infrastructure to help people find meaning from any of that. And um, I think that somehow that would be a healthy thing. I don't want to like I don't want a trade board for software engineering that is like it needs to license you to get a job. I think that would be a terrible idea. Because one of the reasons software is done well is because we don't do that. However, I haven't seen any attempt at like instilling software engineering ethics in a really long time. And the only major ones I could think of, so like the Free Software Foundation with Richard Stallman, if you don't know the name FSF, the GNU project, all the GNU utils. The reason why he insists on people calling Linux GNU/Linux, that was an attempt at instilling an ethical framework into software. It's one that I disagree with, and it's one that a lot of people disagree with, which is maybe why it didn't take hold. But that was somebody was trying, right? And then when the open source movement started in part. So the Free Software Foundation did free software, which was kind of communist, right? And then open source was like, no, we're about making the source available, but not communist, right? Um, and that was a little bit of a different way of attempting to instill ethics. But both of those are really, really old now, and I don't know. There probably have been some other attempts, but they're all really small, right? Like maybe for all the Temple OS Holy See fanatics in the crowd, that was maybe a very small effort, right? But like as humanity, we haven't made an effort there, and maybe it's because it's changing too fast. Maybe it's because it's always just a power struggle and nobody has power. But um, I would like to see some attempts to ground the practice in this idea that, like, yes, there are some things to do that are good and some things to do that are not very good. And there are some things to do that will make you happier and some things to do that will make you less happy. And just that, because most programmers are depressed most of the time. That's my experience. Um, why is that? I don't know, but it's true. Maybe it's because if you're not depressed, you won't sit in front of a computer all day. Like it might be that simple. But for all of my life, most of the programmers that I know are depressed most of the time. And we ought to at least look at that. We ought to at least look at that and say, like, what is that and why is that way? And what can we do about that? Now, I will not apply that to myself anymore. I would say that I used to have much more of a depressive tendency many years ago, but somehow I grew out of it. I'm almost never depressed these days, but I certainly formed the habits of how to work and all that back in those days when I was depressed all the time. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if I just wouldn't be a programmer now. So maybe if you make people happier, you're going to destroy the industry. But we should at least figure that out. Um,
Yeah, but still, I believe that it's true what you have said is that like programmers who are depressed might not see like what they are adding to the whole society with their skills and talents, right?
and here's the thing: is it's a little bit.
At least that's
So
what
as
I
soon as
experienced so far in my life, seeing programmers being depressed.
yes, I don't think it's a shock to any career programmer to say most programmers are depressed. Most of us will go like, "Yep." So so what is that is one question, but also um, when I say there should be some kind of idea about ethics, maybe even ethics is the wrong idea. There needs to be like a life philosophy attached. Because as soon as you start saying ethics, it's going to go downhill really fast in directions that I don't. Someone's going to be like, oh, it's about climate change, right?
Yeah.
Or these things. And that's not what I'm talking about at all, right? I'm just talking about how do you practice this profession and how do you thrive as a practitioner who is whose life is being made better because you do this thing, right? What is that? And
I
then
think,
society is made better by extension, because the problem is everybody's going to argue about how society is made better if it's not through extension of the individual. It'll always be, no, it's better if it's communist, or no, it's better if we don't do if we kill all carbon emissions, which requires being communist, or it's better if it's hyper capitalist. I don't know. All these ideas are they're very easy to argue about, and there will never be agreement on them, and they're also beside the point, because the problems that we observe day to day are much more personal than that, right? It's just like,
yeah, but that's the key that you said, it's personal. And I
yeah,
feel like those people who might consume software, they might not
yeah,
be able to like communicate with those people who programmed it, right? Even if it's a game,
yeah,
even if it's like a healthcare software, right? And those people might feel this way because they are not being able to communicate with those whom they made the software or the program for or the project for,
yeah.
right? Even if they
Now,
know that they are helping someone, right, with, for example, a healthcare solution website or something like that that they made.
well, one of the reasons why I decided to spend so much effort making a programming language, which is takes a lot of work to do that if you want it to be good. Again, I mean, you can make a toy and it's not that much work. Um, but I was working on The Witness in 2014, and the game was kind of not that far from done at that point. I was like, oh, this is a good game. It's working. I see this is the thing that I most wanted to do in the world, right? And I'm doing it, and it's going to come out. So I should have been very happy, but like I was going into work every day and I was just kind of depressed. And part of that was just trying to run a company to do this thing, but part of it was the computers and like how much it sucked to program in C++ and wait there for compiles and then pull down the assets from source control and all these things, right? Um, and I just realized like, why am I so? It might have also been diet, like who knows? There's all these things. You know, the food you eat is very important. Um, but whatever all these things added up to, it was just, I was very unhappy, despite the fact that I was succeeding at doing the thing that I most wanted to do in the world at that time. And that's crazy.
True.
Like how, and maybe this is actually, maybe if I knew serious artists in other media, I would find out that they all have the same experience.
True. True.
Um, but it seemed crazy. And part of it was just like programming is such a mess. Like I'm trying to make beautiful things with code and the code is horrible, right? And what do we do about that? So part of what I'm doing with the programming language is trying to create an environment that is not completely polluted everywhere all the time, right? Which is what it's like trying to do things in C++. And, um, you know, I wish if there was some idea of that, if there was some idea in the profession of software engineering generally, that it's your responsibility to make sure that code is not horrible, because we have this aesthetic, like we all know that there's some code is good and some code is bad, but somehow, despite the fact that we all know this, most people output code that is really horrible most of the time, and then they give you excuses about why it's bad, like, oh well, the customer won't pay for better business logic. Or when you hear the
Yeah.
phrase the customer or business logic, you're talking to someone who is part of the problem,
Yeah.
right? So, so somehow we're not doing a good enough job. But again, I don't know how to solve it exactly, because as soon as you say there's a responsibility, someone's going to say, "Oh, well, that means you need to code like Uncle Bob in clean code, or you need to program everything in Rust
Yeah.
because memory safety." And like none of these things are true, right? And so how do you make this happen without doing an incredible amount of damage to software engineering? I don't know. So maybe it's fine right now. I don't
I
know.
think it's again like people are not being educated enough and not having enough passion. I can name you an example to this topic of yours that you mentioned, that when I was working as a journalist for a video game web shop. I remember my boss told us this story about the programmer behind the website itself, and he was like making so many mistakes throughout the journey of his making this website coming alive. And I remember he told me that they fired him and they needed a new guy, but they hired him again to fix the mistakes for even more money, and then hired a new guy to fix his mistakes. And they did that with like four guys. So they hired four guys, and always the next guy made the corrections to these mistakes that the last guy made, right? Rather than have one person who is passionate enough to make the whole project come together, right? Without
Yeah.
mistakes. And that's again like not having being educated enough, and also not having the passion for the project that you, like you mentioned, having and knowing that you're giving something to the table, not just for you, not just for the company, not just for the money, but helping people, creating this website that will be very good for the people who would like to buy video games through that website. Because at the end of the day, it matters. People do not care about it, but if you think about it, that hey, I'm as a consumer might not be able to click on that button. I will be angry, and I might not be buying the games from that website because that button doesn't exist, or doesn't is not implemented well enough, right? So it won't work, and you will lose a customer by that. And that's the problem, and that's the reason I feel like people don't think that far ahead, right? When they work their job.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mess. It is a mess.
Yeah,
But again, I mean, be careful when you try to solve problems also, right?
true, true,
Because
true.
the history is full of people trying to solve problems who made things worse. So I don't know. I just I would like for a situation where there's not necessarily more rules, but there was more conscientiousness on the part of every individual programmer. And I don't know exactly how you do that, aside from starting a new religion that is light on rules. We've been going a long time. How about can we take a short break and I'll get some more water
Yeah,
and
sure,
stuff?
sure, sure,
And
sure thing, sure thing. Yeah, sure, sure.
is the chat? I'm not in
Yeah, I will
chat,
look
so
into the
we'll just
chat
kind of
and see if there is any
yeah. Maybe we
question
can
in the
ask
chat.
questions from people.
Yeah, let
All right,
us
I'll be
know.
back in a minute.
Okay, 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 okay. Let us know, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if there is any question. Okay, there are so many questions. Sorry, I missed so much. I missed so much. My bad, my bad, my bad. Okay, by the way, thank you for the follows. Alex, Bishop, Philip, Eng, and Deathheart. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the follows. Thank you so much. There are no questions, just audio complaints. Oh, my bad. Oh, okay, okay. Let me read back the chat. Oh, my volume was too loud. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. Okay. I tuned the volume, and it showed that my volume is okay in OBS, but probably Twitch doubled it up somehow. Is it better now? Is it better now? Is it better now? Sorry for that. I checked it when we started the stream. Sorry for that. Is it better now? Yeah, I will tune and add some more volume to his voice. Sorry for that. Thank you for letting me know. I wasn't focusing on the chat because I always read the chat at the end or during the end when people can ask questions. So sorry for that. This is better. Nice, nice, nice. Okay. Thank you, Dandy. Okay, let me go back and see if anyone had a question.
Hey, I am on the chat now.
Oh, nice, nice, nice. I'm watching
I
like the
can
chat
also
as
see
well. Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Although, if they're not in English, I will not understand.
No, I will translate it to you. But most of the questions and comments were like in English. Yeah. And he said we need to kill university as a society. It's already dead. There is just too much belief. It's too good. I honestly hate it. We can do a lot better per person. And where is the money going? Yes. Yeah.
People are saying my volume's quiet.
Yeah. I tuned it now. Yeah, I tuned it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I did that. Thank you.
Okay.
You.
I might be able to do something on my side if you need that, but you know.
It seemed okay when
Yeah,
it
I won't
started.
mess with it.
No,
If
it's
we're
okay.
fine.
I tuned it, so it's better now. Let me know, everyone in the chat. Question the baker is asking: when designing your games and trying to explore the main core idea, do you ever get? Oh, sorry, I miss. Oh, okay. I let me sorry. Let me find the question
I see it.
again.
Do you ever get stuck with how to do
Oh
that?
yeah.
Um, and if so, how do you work through it? I think it's natural to be a little bit stuck sometimes because if it's a hard problem, I don't think you expect to necessarily know the answer all the time. Sometimes just calendar time going by will solve this, right? So, you know, your mind is very sophisticated and you're thinking about things all the time, even if you don't realize it. And you're solving problems. So, when you play a puzzle game, if you've played puzzle games, um, in my experience, often I'll be trying to solve a puzzle and it's hard, and then I just go get lunch or I go to bed and I wake up in the morning and I know the answer to the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And games can be great because they really highlight that. They show you very clearly that that's happening, but that's happening for you about everything all the time. And if you're trying hard to understand how to make a game good, for example, you're trying to solve that puzzle all the time in the background when you go to lunch and whatever. And so sometimes just more time will get you there. However, sometimes this works better than other times. And the times it works better for me, and maybe this is generalizable to everybody, but I don't know because I only know my own experience. For me, when I'm drowning in a lot of to-do list kind of stuff, like um, I'm just doing a bunch of busy work all the time and whatever, and my mind is not in this kind of open, spacious mode, then these kind of ideas don't really show up. Even if I've figured them out at some level, they won't actually show up because there's no room for them to just. Maybe they're very quiet and they need quiet for me to see them or hear them or something, right? Um, so yeah, that's one thing is just time and quietude will often help, and not being stressed. And like, even if you're stressed, dude, I've been running out of money so many times in so many different ways on these projects. That's very stressful. I've been through that so many times. Um, but it helps to just be able to step outside that, at least for a little bit, and just be like, okay, the reason I'm doing all this stress is so that this thing can be good. So let's just go into an area where it's just me and this thing. And yes, we might run out of money next week. That's next week. It's okay. For right now, it's okay. Maybe tomorrow morning I'll start solving this problem again. But I'm just going to make some progress on this. And so insulating yourself. But playing into this whole internet thing, the noise of the internet probably won't help with this, right? So like, if during all your spare time you're like reading tweets, which I've done a lot of, uh, it's really not helpful toward solving
Takes away
problems
that
with this kind
production
of.
time, right? And also that incubator time that you mentioned, that you can get away of
It
realizing how
just
to solve the problems.
it puts your brain in a different place,
True, true,
right? And it's just not as receptive or generative a place. It's not as creative of a place.
true, true.
So get off social media if you're having problems. You can get back on later. I don't even mean this as a prescription for life. I just mean like, take a week. Like, look, there didn't used to be social media for thousands of years.
True.
And then there was. So you can just take a week off and it's fine. And you might find that you're much more creative in that mode. Um, but then the other thing that I do to solve this problem is I just work on other stuff. Because the thing about games is there's so much to do that even if, so with the story thing, for example, I mentioned I didn't know for a long time. I knew kind of generally what I wanted to do with the story, but then I would try to make it specific and it wouldn't quite be good enough. And I was just like, I don't, I don't know what to do with this. So I work on other stuff. Like I had to program things and I had to design levels and I had to, review other levels that were designed by other people. And, um, you can do those things. You can do the things that are easy to do right now and just buy yourself some time on the other things. Now, there's downsides to that. Maybe if you need to, you know, like if you don't know the story yet, but you need to do art production for the game because that's most of the work. Maybe if you want the story to be reflected in the art, that's not going to happen properly because you didn't know the story yet. And that's true. But we're only human and we can only do so much,
True,
right?
true.
And so just you do what you can. And there's always going to be a downside and you just learn to live with that. But that's the best answer that I can give. And the other thing I will just say is, again, like what we were saying with this earlier, if you wrestle with this problem a lot over time, you just get naturally better at it.
True, true.
And so it just becomes, you become better at solving creative problems.
Have you always had this mentality to your life, by the way, or is it something that developed
No,
out
I learned
through?
this.
I see. I
I
see.
learned this from making video games.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Nathan is asking, currently you're finishing the language and the game. Do you think that you will keep working in the games after, or do you plan to maybe approach different projects?
I'll probably stay in games. I know 2 or 3 more games that I would just like to make
I
with
see.
the current engine and code, and maybe even some of the art assets that we have.
Oh, so you already have the
Um,
ideas for those as well. I see. I see.
yeah, one of them I made the prototype of more than 10 years ago,
Oh, okay.
13 years ago,
Okay.
and it's really fun. And I just never finished the game.
I see.
Because I wanted to do this small Sokoban game first, and that turned into a giant project. Um, so yeah, I mean, I do wonder once in a while, like, why am I in games? Like, on the one hand, I just got done telling you how rewarding it is to be a creative
True.
person and to have this kind of viewpoint. On the other hand, I'm kind of disappointed by the games industry as a whole. I'm like, why am I like, if I go back in time to when I started, there were quite a few people who had like a lot of ideas about how they were going to do interesting things and be creative and all this stuff. And you look at now that we've had this whole indie revolution when like almost all the games on almost all platforms are indie games, um, they can be creative in certain small ways. Like, oh, here's my different character, or I'm doing a card battler, but it also has sweeping the floor of your shop in between rounds playing cards or whatever. Like there's all this innovation in the small, but the number of designers who are really trying to do really new big stuff is very small. Um, it's less probably even in an absolute number than it was 20 years ago, and the industry is so much bigger. So as a proportion of the industry, it's minuscule. It's almost nobody. And so why did that happen? But then also even in terms of just programming excellence, like back when I got into the industry, people were figuring out 3D and it was so hard. And then we had all these first person shooters for years that were like pushing the edge of what's possible. And it was very impressive how they could possibly do graphics this good and all
I
of
think the
that.
reason for this, sorry for interrupting, I think the reason
Yeah.
for this, I feel like whenever you say that some things like knowledge is accessible for everyone, and everyone can make a game, or everyone can be a firefighter, or everyone can be a police, you will end up in the situation where like you will have a lot of people who are good at it, and you will have some 100, like 100 people only out of like 10 millions who will be the masters of that, knowledge. And I feel like that's what happened to the video game industry as well, that there are so many good games in my opinion, because for me, I love all the games that I play, but like you said, it's also very true that there are only just a few outstanding games, because it shows
Yeah.
that you let all the people like make games, which is a very cool thing, because in my opinion, I am more of an emotional person and I respect emotional stories. But I still feel
Yeah.
like if you give the power to everyone, you will end up in a society where like there will be a lot of people who are making games, but they are not like trying to master it, right? They are just doing
Yeah.
it for themselves, which is fine and which is very good in my opinion, because like I said, for me, all the games are great because like you can see the personal touch and connection and the stories that people wanted to tell. For example, if they lose their father, they will write a story about losing a father, and you can resonate with it if you had the same experience. But a lot
Yeah. I
of
mean,
people are
and
not into like making a great game, like you said, because they haven't been thought of it, or they haven't been passionate about it, or might be this the other end of the same coin, that they would like to, but they might not have the knowledge, right? And again, we can go back to like education, right? So
yeah, I mean, it is so hard to make games that like I can't blame people for not doing them the way that I want them or whatever, right? Um, but yeah, it's weird. So the thing that you mentioned about maybe you have the same number of good or top people as the field grows,
yeah,
and then the field really just fills out. I think that explains a lot, but it doesn't explain everything actually, because I think that if you just count the individual number of people in that top of designers, it's less now than it was when I was coming into the game industry, right? And why is that? Like, why would it be? I understand why it would be the same or the same adjusted for population, but if it's less, and maybe this is just me, who's to say that I have an accurate read? I might be measuring this wrong, but if it really is less, um, why are we so uncreative now,
I
right?
think because most of the people nowadays are not thinking globally. I remember our professor at university, also university example. See,
Yeah.
I can say that I learned a lot from university professors, even if it wasn't programming. But he told us that you have to like think globally, but act like for your own personal fields in order to gain a global, success. And it's not like success like have a
Yeah.
lot of money, or be famous or be powerful, but to give back to the society. That's what he meant, like having this
Yeah.
ultimate goal, global goal and result. And that's how I think a lot of people fail in their field, that they would like to make something big, but they do not think it's about it globally. They just, think about it
Yeah.
in their personal bubble, if you can say so.
Yeah, but so then in terms of my own personal choices, to go back to the question, like I've been game guy my whole life, and that's been great. But it's not that hard to just look around, and it's like, okay, there's Elon Musk over there catching rockets and doing all these electric cars and stuff. And there's all these people doing AI stuff, most of which I think is trash, but some of which may be highly impactful. Like I kind of feel like, why am I wasting my time in games? And I mean, the answer is, well, the art of it and the interestingness of it and all that, and maybe I bring something that wouldn't be there if I weren't here. But it feels like sometimes I'm just not able to make that much of a contribution from my like I feel like the whole industry is ignoring the general direction that I went in and that some other creative people went in, and they're just making slop, right? It's like a slop industry, which it always was, but now it's like slop with very little special stuff anymore. And it's just like, oh, if that's the way it's going to go, should I really be here anymore? I don't know. And I'm honestly, I'm unlikely to change what I do, but I do feel sad about it. I feel sad about what the games industry is today, even though it should be on paper pretty cool that everyone can make games, and that was supposed to bring all this creativity in, and it just kind of hasn't. Um, maybe this is a temporary situation and we'll recover from it. I don't actually know. But yeah, I do wonder. So I was just thinking about this like a week or two ago, because there's all this AI stuff and it's mostly trash. But I was like, if I were to make a company, the goal of which was to have a big impact on the world, and I were to use AI, if I were to go pitch this to like a venture capitalist of like, please give me $50 million to do this company, which is stupid because it's not like I didn't have some portion of that in the past. But like, to say like, hey, what would this thing be that would have a large impact? And like I came up with an idea right away that's like, yeah, I could go do that, and maybe it would succeed, maybe it would fail, but if it succeeded, it would be considered very important in the world. Whereas what I do right now is like, yeah, I make some video games. Like, whatever, man. Um, So I have doubts sometimes, but the plan for the at least the foreseeable future is keep making games. And maybe that means I'm just stupid. I don't know. It's what I'm doing.
I see. Thank you, by the way, for the question and the answer as well.
Yeah,
Do you feel
thanks.
like do you feel like you mentioned this topic and you mentioned that sometimes you have doubts about this? Do you think like your games are not important and not changing people? That's how you feel?
No, I do. Like, I feel like it's been a good contribution. Like both Braid and The Witness, obviously people played and it was a good impact on their life and all that, right? Um, it just takes so long. Like I've been working on this game for 9 years, and it's still not out and people still can't play it. That's just an incredibly long time. It's really hard. I never want to do it again. If only just from a look, I want to make more things for more people standpoint, right? But it's just like, what could I have done in 9 freaking years, right? It's the answer is there's a lot of things. Now, I did do a lot of things. Like I made a freaking programming language that's really good, and the game's really good, and it's also really big, and we did the Braid Anniversary Edition. And I mean, when you run a company, there's all this stuff. Like, look, I made jobs for between 8 and 14 people for 8 years, and or 9, 10 years, and made all that. You know, that matters a lot too. So, like,
But does it matter for you too? That's the question. Like does it give you a satisfying pleasure moment in your life every time you see that it gave a lot of positive things to the people? I know it's a very personal and very hard
it's a weird
question.
thing to think of. Like, I almost don't operate that way.
I see.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but you
This is
mentioned
maybe too
before
big of a
that it
topic to
should
talk
be
about right now.
important for you, right? You mentioned before
It
that.
is. It is important to me, but also, um, I almost feel betrayed by feedback from the world, both positive and negative,
I see.
that it doesn't feel close to me. So when people, even if someone tells me they like my games or whatever, I still get recognized on the street, even though I haven't released anything in 9 years, which is crazy. But, people say, "Hey, I like your games," and whatever. And um, it just doesn't feel close to me in a way that's deep. Like,
But
it's
why? Why?
intellectually I understand it and all that, but it's not what keeps me going,
But
right?
why?
Like, what keeps you going has to be deeper than it has to be pretty deep. And recognition of other people, it turns out, wasn't that. And
I
I
see.
think I think this has its roots in way back the way Braid was received and talked about on the internet. I think I felt so. I mean, on the one hand, it's great that your game is being popular and everybody's playing it.
I see.
But on the other hand, I felt so betrayed and alienated by that process that, like, I just realized that there was nothing there for me. Like, this was not a path by which I could uh, ever be satisfied with anything.
The
So,
process you meant like the process of making the game?
no, the process, like, after it comes out
Oh, okay,
and
okay,
people
okay.
start playing it, and what do they say about it?
Okay.
And what crappy things do they say about what a stupid game this is, and their game would be better. But also, when people say they like it, this is the most alienating thing. When people say they like it and it's something that really uh, does not resonate with you at all, the reason why they like it or something, and they say this a lot, then you start, it's a pretty weird space. And I've actually talked to writers who have had the same experience, right? And so this is not a game specific thing. Um, it's just like, on the one hand, I'm happy for them that they enjoyed the game. That's great. That's very intellectual understanding. But, like, okay, the reason you enjoyed the game, on the face of it, the way you're explaining this has nothing to do with any of the motivation that made me work hard for all those years, right? And so that's the alienating part. And so if you're going to keep working hard, you have to have a reason to keep working hard that's not that. Now,
But
yeah, I
that's
don't know.
again that you mentioned at the beginning of our interview that there are so many creators out there who got famous that but people did not understand their motives and their beliefs and their influence, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's the alienating part that you mentioned. That's how
yeah,
you would like to, as a creator. I believe that all of us creators who create anything, even if it's a book or a poem, we would like to connect with our problems, with our visions, with our messages, with the people who consume our product or our projects or our craft, right? But
yes.
if we
And that's,
cannot on a personal level, we will feel alienated even if they say that they love it, right? For example, a very, very small example to this, when people consume a love poem, they might see it like, okay, it's a love poem, but the creator might be very sad during those moments writing that love poem because like he have been through, for example, a breakup with love, right? So and he will be sad that people love it because it wasn't his intention to put like a happy love poem. Just like it's weird because I know that a lot of creators, for example, and writers who write about their feelings, they always write what they would love to experience if they are sad, right? So the
yeah.
the people who will consume those writings, they will see it like, oh, it's a happy ending story. The creator might be happy when he wrote it, but at the end of the day, we realize reading his, documentaries like later, like 10 years after releasing a book, that hey, he was sad. Why? He wanted to
Yeah.
be happy. He wanted to be at the happy place, right? And there will be some hints in the stories that hey, he was sad, and only those people will understand, who will be able to resonate with him. Or, like I said before at the beginning of our interview, they understood it because they had the same experiences as the creator.
Yeah, yeah, I think that definitely happens.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say any of what I said as a to complain in any way at
Yeah, I
all, because
understand. No, I
people,
understand it.
so I know you get it, but like sometimes on the internet, people intentionally misinterpret things. Like, here's the thing. Even though I feel like it was a very alienating process, I'm just still very deeply appreciative of all the people who like the game. Like,
It's
it's the
understandable. Yeah.
reason that I can still make
True,
games,
true, true,
right?
true, 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 true.
And it's the reason that so if I made games and hardly anyone ever played them, um, I'm not sure I would keep making games
I
because
see.
it's so hard, right?
I see.
And so it's the reason why I keep going. So I'm super deeply appreciative of all the people who have played my side, and I don't take it for granted, because if 2024 shows us anything, it's like maybe all this can go away. Like, so many companies went out. Companies are still going out of business and getting shut down and having massive layoffs in January 2025. Like, it's not over yet.
True.
So anyone who isn't deeply appreciative of any audience that they have is super wrong to not deeply appreciate that. So it's a very difficult place to be, of like, yeah, I don't know.
I know that
But to go
feeling.
back,
It's like you would be feeling alone. That you would be
yeah,
down on the road to talk with somebody about your problems, but you cannot because they do not understand it. They say that they understand it, but they don't really, because
yeah,
they might not have been through. It's like the best example for this might be like if you lose somebody in your life who is important to you, for example, a family member, and you're talking with a person who never lost anybody in their life, right?
there's not
And
going to be the right connection
the
there.
right
Yeah,
connection, exactly, and they will say that, okay, I'm sad about it and I'm trying to help you, but they won't be able to feel that way, right? And you will appreciate them, that they are staying next to you, they are staying next to you when you are crying, they are trying to take you out that sad place, but still you will feel like still alone, right? Because they are not understanding you. And I think
yeah,
that is true for everybody, not just people who are creating any craft. Like, on a personal level, on an everyday level, people feel alone every day, like if they are not being able to understand by others.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good analogy for sure.
Thank you, by
I'm
the
looking
way,
at
for the
questions.
question and the answer. Kazumi is
I
asking.
probably don't want to go too much longer. It's been
No,
like
it's
three
okay, it's okay,
hours,
it's okay,
so
it's
we could
okay.
take another couple of questions or something. At
Okay.
some point, I've got to go do
No,
some
yeah,
stuff
it's
here.
understandable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You should pick. I picked the last question. You
All
should
right, let
pick
me
one.
see. While they're talking about the discussion we just had,
Oh, okay.
there's probably a lot of questions we missed. What do I think I would be doing if not games? Well, okay, to go back to that part of the discussion, I don't want to give away my idea, because maybe it's a really good business idea. Maybe it's a little too early to do this idea that I had. This idea, I mean, when I think, if I didn't do games, what would I go do? Then that's the essence of this question. There's all these things that I approach. So, we said earlier, I said early on in this conversation, like, most software is very trashy, and if you could rebuild all of software, it would be much better. Like, it wouldn't just be smaller and have fewer bugs, but like, it would be a huge economic benefit, because everybody would not be dragged down all the time by all the problems and all these things, right? Now, I don't know how to wave a magic wand and just make that happen, but if you wanted to think about, in 2025, how would I start making that happen? There's a few different answers that actually could kind of make an impact to some degree or another. And they're very hard, right? They're things where I wouldn't be able to sit down right this second and program the actual solution, but it would be like, I kind of know the research direction in which I would go. So if I weren't doing games, it would probably be something like dealing with the software problem that we have. And maybe I wouldn't succeed. So here's the thing, there's all these trade-offs in this. Like, I'm making games. The thing about games, you could fail making a game, but it's your fault if you fail because you just didn't work hard enough, or maybe you picked an idea that was too hard or whatever, but you could have succeeded no matter what. And that's part of what's interesting about it. Maybe nobody will buy it. That's a little bit separate, but at least making the thing. When it comes to doing research, maybe you were just wrong that this could ever work and there was no way to know. And then you just did all this research and then it essentially comes to nothing except whatever satisfaction that you have that you did the research. That's a much harder thing. And in fact, Elon Musk in interviews used to talk about this. It was like he had an opportunity to do a PhD program at Stanford working on like supercapacitors, right? Which would be a great way to drive electric vehicles and all sorts of things. But he was like, okay, but maybe it just doesn't work at all. In which case, I would waste that part of my life. It's a complete gamble because it's unknowable if this actually works, right?
True.
And so that's the downside of any kind of direction like this, right? And we're still not using like these kind of capacitors. So 20 something years later, maybe he made a good choice. Or maybe he would have been the person to figure it out.
True.
Right?
True.
I don't know.
Very true.
So I don't want to get more specific than that, but there's a lot of, if you're a good programmer, there's never been more opportunity to have impact on the world with code in both a good way and a bad way. And just that temptation is always there to just go do something completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it ties back to the topic we discussed earlier, that people do not see as programmers what they are like, helping other people if they make the code, or at least most of them do not see it, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm not talking. So one thing I talked about on my own stream sometimes is an operating system project. That's not what I'm talking about right now. This would be something very different from that.
Okay. Kazum, by the way, asked, what do you think? Yeah, okay. That's the question you're at. Sorry.
Well, I see another question.
Oh, go for that. Go for
How
that.
much of the size of the current game can be attributed to working in a language you are more productive with? It's hard to say because a lot of the reason this game is big is just content. It's not really code related, but sometimes you do code related things like, oh, I can do these game mechanics over here, and that gives us more content. So it's not that simple. I would say there definitely is an impact from the programming language making me more productive. It makes it easier to do these gameplay code. Like, I was working on this ending stuff this week, and I did a bunch of gameplay code stuff that just, it would have been way more annoying in C++. It also would have taken more raw time. Like, I don't know, it probably would have taken 30 or 40% more time just in C++. But then just also the fact that I'm not being depressed by the programming language while I'm thinking in this creative mode, because I'm like, oh, won't it be cool if in this level we could do this? And oh, that's going to be hard to program, but I think I can do it. And then I go do it and it works. And having that loop while you're in a good mental state is, I think it comes out better creatively, the designer programmer loop, than when you're fighting the programming language and you're angry all the time about it. So I think it's had a meaningful impact, even though the game is mostly big due to content, but I don't think I can really quantify.
I see. But those might be the limitations that we are talking about, that a lot of creators, a lot of like game developers end up having issues with, right? And that's how they end up like having these limitations and not going for the global project that they always wanted to go, that I mentioned, right? So they end up making smaller games, which is fine, because like I said, for me, I feel like personal games are also like fine. It's just they might always have that big dream game in their life, right? They just have seen these limitations that they cannot across or cannot go beyond, right? So
Yep. And when I talk about it being tempting to not be in games, this is also the exact time, like, it's not quite the hardest time in game development anymore, but it was for years because we had all these disruptions, like I said, to the ability to even run a team. But when you're working on a complicated project, the time when it gets hard is like after all the new ideas are in, but long, long before it's a fully playable game that anyone would be interested in. There's just a huge amount of work in the middle. And it's always so much more than you thought it would be. And you get lost in all that. And that's the worst time. And so for us, we probably started coming out of that time, 6 months ago or something, maybe a little less. Maybe in October when I did this ending, because that was an official, like, oh, we're doing end game stuff now. The game might be finished someday. Oh my God, right? um, it just makes it real. So, but this is, we're still in a relatively hard time because it's like the ideas have mostly happened, but it's just we got to turn the crank really fast a lot for the next year and some amount of time to finish the game. And this is also when, like I said, it's been like 9 years down the river and not much to show for it because nothing has come out yet, right?
sure.
After the game has come out, then people get to play it and it looks like there was a point to that time. But before the game has come out, it's literally nothing. Like if a nuclear bomb goes off in Colorado right now and this game never exists, it'll just be 9 years when I worked on stuff, right? Well, and also the same can be said for the programming language, right? That's a little bit different because we have a closed beta that a lot of people are in, and you can see people streaming, even on Twitch. Like right now, probably there's someone streaming it. So that's a little bit more real, but it's still like we want to release it eventually and get it done. And so, yeah, we're at a hard time, but when the costs are almost maximum and the benefits are still zero. So after these things come out, I may be in a very different mood about all this.
True, true. Thank you, by the way, again for the questions and the answers. Should I go into another question, by the way, from the chat?
Let's do, if you have one last one, let's
Okay,
finish it
okay.
up.
I also have a last one, by the way, so I will, if that's
Well,
okay, I
one
will.
chat and then
Yeah,
yours.
yeah. Thank you for that. Okay. Bum. Okay, let me read back. Oh, the big. Oh yeah, you read that. Okay, let's me.
Or if there's no more audience questions, we can just do your question. We don't need to grab one.
Okay. I haven't found one. They were like talking about the topics that we talked. Let me just. Oh, okay. There was a question Mini asked it in Hungarian. I will translate it. So, how can you? What would be your advice in order to like for people if they are like smaller and like have a dream, even if it's not a video game, to start and like pursue it from all the experiences that you have. So it's not about making video games, but like how will you stick to your vision and to dream and not give up? We talked about it a
People
bit,
ask
right?
this a lot. Yeah. I think the only additional things I can say, and we touched on this, but if you think that a project is important in some way, you're much more likely to finish it and stick with it, right? If it was just a cool idea that you had and you didn't think about how hard it would be to do, and then you realize 6 months in that it's going to take 3 more years, you might well feel like that's not worth it for this little idea that you had, right? And so part of the trick, and this is actually a skill that you can learn, you can get better at having ideas that are important to you. Because before Braid, I didn't really know. I had all sorts of project ideas that I was just like, oh, this would be cool, that would be cool. But yeah, I kept giving up on them because they weren't that important to me ultimately. But then at some point, a switch flipped and it was like, oh, okay, I know how to do things that I really care about now. And then I just keep getting better at that, I guess. So
I see.
you can look to build the skill and realize it's not like if you're not that good at it right now, you can get better. You can get better at having ideas, like which is a weird thing to say, but you can. You can get better at having ideas that you care about. But also, I mean, I think a lot of people just haven't done enough exploration to even know what territory is important to them. Like, forget even the specific idea. Like, they're just, at some point I was sort of wandering through life and there was stuff that I could tell you I felt was very important, but I didn't, it was all very general. It wasn't connected to anything specific that I could take action on
I
by
see.
building or making something,
I
right?
see.
The best I knew when I was younger was like writing short stories or something, which was fine. That was a perfectly fine way to express myself. But um, at some point, much later, I something got figured out for me, and that's all that I can say. Is that can happen for anyone, I think.
I see. Do you miss, by the way, writing stories? Like for yourself, not for like a
I
project
have
that you.
not done it. I have not done it in a really long time. I think
I see.
now because I've done so many big, complicated games, I never wrote like a novel length thing
I
before. I
see.
always wrote just short stories. 5,000 words, 8,000. I wrote one thing that was like 11,000. Um, I think these days it actually wouldn't be that hard to write a novel just because all these complicated interweavings of ideas that you would have to make it good. I've done that. I didn't understand how to do that when I was writing short stories. Like my best idea of how to write a novel was just sort of to like expand a short story into a novel and like make more things happen or something or tell a longer story, but I didn't know what that meant. But once you like wrestle with intertwining interconnected ideas with enough, I think I think now I see what that would look like what it would be like to write a really sophisticated novel, and I think I could do a much better job than I would have back then, for sure. But I'm really busy also, and if I think about what is important to me and how would I take action on it, it's like there's some stuff I could write stories about that I feel a little bit about, but not as strongly as these other things, and so
I see.
it just wouldn't. It doesn't feel like the right direction to go, but maybe that's wrong. Who
I see.
knows?
I see.
Yeah.
So my last question would be, by the way, from all the topics that we discussed and touched, do you think like you will ever like find that calm phase in your life? You mentioned like you have always these doubts that you are in your right moment and right time in your life, because
Yeah.
like sometimes you feel that you are alone because people do not understand the struggle that you have been through to
Yeah.
make these games. Do you feel like you will reach that calm phase in your life? I know it's a more personal question, so sorry for that. If you don't want to answer it, it's of
If
course
you
fine.
mean, I mean, there's different ways I can interpret it. If you mean that like all the problems are solved and there's no worries
No, 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 no,
anymore,
no,
or
not like that,
like,
not like that, not like that.
yeah,
It's a general meaning, not like that,
yeah,
not like
that would
that.
only happen if I
Like,
quit games.
do you feel like it's rather like, do you feel like how to explain it? It's like um you will find yourself more, like your,
I don't like that phrase. It doesn't
or
make
you
any
will
sense to me.
understand
But
your goals more while you're doing this. And
no, I mean, I did have that transformation. That happened for me many years ago,
okay.
right? So here's the thing. And again, this may be different personality types, right? But my goal in life has never been to be happy. It has always been
I
instead to
think
do things that I
none of
felt were
us has a
important.
goal as to be happy. It's
Well,
just
no,
we
because
overestimate being happy.
I would try to talk to Americans about this, and they would think that I was weird or crazy when I would
No.
say that.
Like, for
Um,
example, my
but
goal is
so,
to go back to the past and see my grandfather who passed away when I was 12. It's not
well,
being
that
happy.
seems,
It's like that's impossible. Yeah, but like
yeah,
I miss him so much, and I feel so empty without him. Still, I'm trying to pursue my goals. My goals, let's say, like being a
right.
writer or like being a
I
journalist,
see.
so or do my stuff in life. But I still miss him so much on a personal level, and I still love him, even though he's not with me anymore. That I would do anything in order to get him back, or build a time machine, which seems and hears out very crazy,
If you
right?
can figure that out,
Yeah,
that
exactly,
there you
exactly.
go.
So it's not about
Um,
being happy, but about finding my whole self. And that's why I always say that our inner child is very important on the personal level, and
yeah,
that would be the happy times that we talk
I
about.
mean, yeah. Well, I feel like I got there sometime in the middle of making The Witness, right? And then I've just kept extending what I was doing for all this time. And because because I keep picking challenging things, it leads to a lot of like unpleasant times, but I chose that and I understand what I'm doing and I continue to choose it. And it's all, ultimately I feel I am doing what I am meant to do to some degree. And that's also going back to the question about like what would you do outside of games? I Whenever I think about that stuff, it is kind of like intellectual, those thoughts. But I feel like when I'm in games, I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And so I don't really, when I think about what is my future life trajectory, right? And what what are the right decisions to make to produce a better future outcome? It's not about any kind of figuring out who I am or what I should be doing anymore. Like that's for many reasons that's figured out. It's just more executing to the best of my ability the duties which have been assigned to me in this world, which is hard. And yeah,
Do you believe that it
but
it has
I
been assigned to you rather than you chose the goal of yours? I know it's a hard question, but
that's a question about free will that is um, notoriously, it's not only notoriously difficult to answer, it's notoriously difficult to have a conservation or a conversation about because everybody has different pre-existing ideas going into the conversation, right? And so
true.
but I don't use that assigned to me by mistake. But I'm also not claiming that's exactly how it is. It's just like that's the feeling of how it is.
I see.
Um, but the course that I'm on in life was in part determined by me being really excited to play arcade machines in the corner
Yeah,
store when I
that's
was
what
a
I
little
wanted to
kid, or
say.
being
Is that
excited, right?
yeah,
But that's not a choice though. That's my natural intrinsic response prior to any thought. I was just enjoyed and was
around your
very
word that
excited.
you were in at that moment, right?
Yeah. And so you can't actually say that I chose this, really. Um I mean, in other moments you could say that, like moments when it's actually difficult and not enjoyable and like from I make an intellectual decision to stick with what I'm doing. But like what put me on this course was just very very deep instinctual reaction. And so um certainly I wouldn't say uh, yeah, I don't know. I was about to say certainly I wouldn't say that I chose it, but you
I
could
think
also
I
you
think
could
it's a
make the
mix of
opposite
both,
argument.
in my opinion. Like,
Yeah. Well, because like you were saying, there's all sorts of people who are maybe excited about things and then somehow choose not to follow that
yeah, yeah,
excitement, right?
exactly,
And so
exactly.
maybe I just chose to follow the excitement as opposed to other things. And that's a choice. And of course, I mean, if you want to believe that there's such a thing as choice, there's all sorts of moments. Like that initial thing was an instinctive reaction, but of course, as you build like a career and a life out of something, there's all sorts of times over many years when you sort of decide things. But
I mean,
yeah,
I
I don't
feel
know how to think about
I
it.
said, I feel like it's the mix of both. For example, for me, I know that it was a choice that I never drink alcohol because I get bullied for it. So
Yeah.
it's a choice. It's a choice, and it's a life choice. It wasn't like I was born, or it was like the words telling me not to drink. I wasn't. I was never drinking any
Yeah.
alcohol because I get bullied for it, and I didn't give a fuck about society standards that you had to drink in order to fit into society. So
Yeah. Well, that just gets back into the free will question though, ultimately. Right?
yeah.
Is a choice a choice is the question.
Or we might just feel
Um
it that that's a choice, right? And yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you
All
for your
right, thanks
honesty
very
about
much.
everything.
It-
Yeah. And
It's been
thanks
a good
for
conversation.
thank you for everyone who joined us for today's stream and interview. If you can spare some like more time a bit of
Yeah,
stream, I
yeah.
will need some more of your minutes. But for those who are watching
Okay.
us on stream, thanks for tuning in. I hope you had a great time with us, and be on the lookout for our friends here next game. Hopefully we will get to know some more information in the future about.
Hopefully
Yeah,
someday we
exactly,
will even
exactly.
tell you what it's called. But
Exactly,
yes.
exactly. Thank you, thank you, and thank you
Yes.
for joining us for today's episode. For
Yeah.
those who were watching us at today's episode of my Dev Live show, thank you for joining us, and have a great day, night, or evening, depending where you live. Bye, bye, everyone. Bye, bye,
Yeah.
bye, bye.